You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Nation, I want you to tune in to a very cool podcast with Mr. Judd Lienhard. For those of you guys that are not in the know and maybe don't have social media, you will know that I was on Judd's podcast not long ago. He asked me a lot of history about Power Athlete, CrossFit football, and more importantly, my experience with CrossFit. Some of this spurred up a little bit of drama that ended up taking place on social media, as social media is so well tuned to do. So we decided to do another podcast where I got to pay back the favor to Judd and have him on Power Athlete Radio. When I was on his, man, he looked up a ton of information about me and he had some really insightful questions. So I wanted to offer him the same. He's not only just athlete and a guy who trains athletes and has all of his opinions about this, but he's also former military and has some pretty interesting perspectives and ideas on everything from the Second Amendment to freedom of religion and rights and whatnot. So we go through a pretty interesting, varied podcast. And anybody who's ever listened to Power Athlete Radio knows that I love when they deviate from the standard sets and reps and strength and conditioning. So buckle up for a hard-hitting podcast with Mr. Judd Lienhard. I've always believed, and dude, you can co-sign on this because as a military dude, which we'll get into your history, but like you have to prepare people for the demand at which they're going to go out and face. Mm-hmm. So like for you as a soldier and you're going to Afghanistan, you're going into war, you know, Iraq, whatever it is, if you don't physically prepare your soldiers for the rigors of battle, then you've done them a disservice. The same thing happened in football. Mm-hmm. If like I didn't show up in shape and I wasn't ready to go do this, then like, and I get hurt or I'm out of shape or something bad happens, that's on me because I know what they're going to demand of me.
Yeah, I mean, so with elite athletes, they're like racehorses, man. And, you know, people think fast twitch muscle is universally better. It's not. It's just different, right? It's more suited for certain things. But so you have to be very careful with those athletes because if they're not in shape, you ever see somebody that's very, and I was a little bit like this in college.
Like real twitchy?
Yeah, real twitchy.
Yeah.
But I didn't like to like do hard shit like run distance and stuff like that. Yeah. You know, I like the bodybuilding shit.
Yeah.
When I was put through, like we had to run miles too in college and I was always the dead last. I was in the worst shape of anybody there.
Sure.
But I suffered because I had a lot of fast twitch muscle. So I couldn't just sit on my butt. When I got in the Army, I had to train really. When they first told me that the time standard to just get in was like a 15-minute 2-mile, which, you know, no, that's not a very fast 2-mile.
Yeah.
I had never run a 2-mile. I was like, holy shit, I had to Google it. I thought that was like close to a world record. And I was like, and like my first 2-mile, I think I ran like 16:30, you know, and I was like ripped and a big bodybuilder, you know, and I would still sprinting and everything. But it's just like you have to be very careful with those kids when you introduce that kind of stuff because they are more susceptible to things like rhabdo.
Yeah.
You know,
there's also like an effect. So you end up becoming what you train. And there was a really cool passage, I think it was in Zadaskorsky's Science and Practice, that if you do too much high effort, low intensity work, you get a conversion of fast twitch muscle fibers to slow twitch muscle fibers to be able to handle the load. Mm-hmm. That's why like there's a time segment, you know, let's say it's 7 to 10 seconds. So when we started doing a lot of the CrossFit football program, it's like, I want you to go as hard as you can for, you know, 10 to 15 seconds. And then I want you to rest for 45. So we started almost building it in so that people would do 3 reps and then move to the next one and then 3 reps and 3 reps. So I started backing into this stuff and then everybody got bigger and stronger because the problem that we found is that if you do 21 reps in a row, that might take you 2 minutes. And there definitely is this idea that you're going to just blow out and it just doesn't favor those athletes.
Your body is just a system trying to survive and it's going to adapt to whatever's put in front of it. And that's a great way to do it is to take, you know, what are they, complex sets? I mean, I love complex sets.
Yeah. Dude, I call it, I mean, my entire training, we would use PAP, post-activation potentiation. Mm-hmm. I mean, we would do something heavy, then do something dynamic. And like that has been, and people are like, those supersets, I'm like, you can call them clusters, you can call them whatever you want. That's just how we've always trained. You know, if you're going to, let's
clusters,
say you're going to, clusters, like whatever you want to call it. Like the thought of doing something and then resting for like 2 to 4 minutes and then doing it again, like that's, I've never liked that training. It just gets to be real boring.
Yeah, I mean, I had incredible strength gains, but I would take like sets of 6 and I would divide it into sets of 2 with short rest periods to where most of that set I do not feel like I'm close to fatigue. I just feel like some people like Charlie Francis kind of inherently understood that, and it's taken, and just like we specifically adapt to our demands. And just like the further you get away from that, and I'm not talking about adding complexity that takes away from the stimulus, but unless you have, well, let me back up. People like to rag on bodybuilders and they call it non-functional hypertrophy. So it is functional.
That's such a weird. That's
functional
a weird
for
statement.
what they're doing.
Well, but they're driving adaptation for their intended use.
It's like strength endurance.
Yeah.
And so it's functional for what they do. There's no adaptation that's non-functional.
Yeah.
It's just not functional to the sport. So it's because it's not specific enough. Yeah. I hate that term, and I hate when people rag on bodybuilders because.
So what bodybuilders have done, and you know this, dude, they've perfected the art of carrying the most amount of muscle in relation to body fat. That's it. That's right. Like, and so I even at the seminar that when we would teach CrossFit football, I would stand up and I did this whole thing like, what can you learn from bodybuilding? And they'd be like, nothing. And I'd be like, one, these guys have figured out the exact prescription on how to carry the most amount of muscle in relation to body fat. They figured out how to eat and all of these factors. What if you have a kid that comes in who's 135 pounds and needs to be 165 pounds? You better know a little bit of something about bodybuilding to help them put on this 30 pounds. And these people were like, I would never have an athlete put on 30 pounds. I'm like, well, then you've never worked. I was 165 pounds before I started lifting weights. And my coach is like, you got to be 200 next year. And we just went on the seafood diet. We just ate everything we saw. Yeah. And we lifted weights and we figured if we went to the gym 3 times a day, it would work, and ended up just resulting in a bunch of injuries that I still probably battle with today. But it was we didn't have any other direction. We just knew that if I ate a lot of food and lifted these heavy things, I got bigger because we saw that in bodybuilding. And
muscle hypertrophy in itself does have some performance benefits, just having on strength and power and everything. A base of hypertrophy does have benefits. It's not completely
larger
useless.
Cross-sectional size of a muscle theoretically will be able to support more weight.
Exactly.
So
it's like more pillars under a building, basically.
Yeah. And the fact that there's this idea of functional versus non-functional hypertrophy was always kind of like, it was always the sarcoplasmic versus myofibular. And there was this idea that you could kind of train within a certain percentage of rep range to drive adaptation for each of those different muscle fibers. And then they realized that you can't develop anything in a vacuum. All these things happen in concert.
Yeah. I mean, there's a broad spectrum. Yeah, obviously, if you're working in the 3 to 5 rep range, it's going to have a different effect than the 20 to 30. Some people actually for a while postulated against that. I remember I'm like, you're insane. You cannot, because when you started to fatigue, you activate your fast twitch fibers, and they conflated that with strength. And I'm like, it's not going to work, man.
Well, there was we interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Do you want to build thick, sidewalk-splitting slabs of muscle? Let me introduce you to Jack Street. Get access to the same tried and true training methods I followed during my 10 years in the NFL, all to walk into training camp at 308 pounds at sub 8% body fat. Punch your ticket to the gain train and join thousands of residents already following Jack Street. Head to powerathletehq.com/Jack Street and claim your 7-day free trial today. Now back to the show. What's his name? Chris Beardsley put out a pretty good piece, and the idea that rep ranges from, let's say, 4 to 6 out to 30 reps, right? Like hypertrophy is similar if you're working towards failure. The issue is that if you need, let's say it's 30 reps, but if the driver's 31 and you stop at 30, there's very little effect. Yeah. But if it's 4 to 6 and you hit 4 and the 6 is the number, the margin of error gets so big on those heavier weights. And I might have said this on your podcast. The observation I made in the NFL, I could tell you within an ounce, just looking at a guy, whether or not he trained over 85%. Because the guys that trained over 85% had more muscle because they were training closer to failure and they're closer to their effort. When it's 30 reps, I'm sure you've done a 225 for a 30 rep back squat.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. Yeah. But could you do 31? Sure. Could you do 32? I guess. Could you do 33? Even though you're burning, could you keep doing it? Is it 28? Is it 26?
That type of training has a place. If you're at a spot where you just can't load heavy and you want some muscle hypertrophy, it's if you can't do other stuff, sure, high rep, man. But it's so brutal and it's so limited. But they've had it right for years, man. It's the 4 to 12 rep range is the sweet spot. There's a reason most people stick in that rep range, because you get a little bit of benefit on both with either one.
So we had Jay Cutler on the podcast. This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show. Four sets of 12. That's it.
Yeah.
He did the same movements, 4 sets of 12. This cycle, I'm going to swap out one movement, but it was 4 sets of 12. He followed the exact same thing. He's like, the weight is a stimulus. I just need to eat enough calories. That was it.
If you're just trying to get bigger muscles, absolutely.
And he's like, and then the primer, he goes, the weights of the primer, sleep, he goes, everything, the drugs that they take, like it's all this, but he's like, I was not trying to confuse my muscles. This idea of muscle confusion.
That's another one. Non-functional muscle confusion. Those two things irk me.
Well, I remember being like, why do you want to confuse your muscles? Yeah. And where it comes from was, wasn't it Tony Horton?
Oh my
Remember,
God,
he had that infomercial. It was called Muscle Confusion, where, your muscles are accommodated. We're going to confuse them, and then they're going to grow as a response. And I like, dude, when I came to CrossFit and when I went to the level 1, I was like, oh my God, this is Tony Horton's Muscle Confusion. And then it
is funny. They try to act like you're doing stuff that's built upon stuff that's been around. And I love P90X. I love Tony Horton. He was not an exercise scientist.
No,
but like if you look at the workouts,
they sold a fucking billion of those things.
And those things are hard, man. If you're just a person around the house, will get you in shape. Man. I mean, those things are hard.
Yeah. We did P90X, dude. And then the hilarious part was when we owned the CrossFit gym, we used to have people all the time that did P90X at home. And then they would come to CrossFit and they'd be like, P90X. And we'd be like, all right, let's go. And it was really pretty funny that like people that they saw that. But I'll tell you, not to belabor CrossFit, but like CrossFit hit this amazing cross section, which was the moment of like the launching of YouTube and the movie 300. Like this stuff all kind of conversed, because I remember seeing the movie 300. I think I told you this. So I fucking saw it, walked right out, went in the next 30 theater and watched it back to back.
Yeah.
And I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to change people's perception of what what people should look like. And it did. I remember people being like, this guy's a ripped. I had never heard anybody say that before. Like, too muscular, too big, too this. Yeah. And that movie changed it.
I'm a fan of history in general, but especially like bodybuilding history.
I know you're a fan of history. I found your stuff on The Humanist.
Oh yeah. Enjoy writing as well.
Yeah. So I like, little known fact is I was kind of doing research for this podcast. When I was on your podcast, you did extensive research on me, and I appreciate that. It's always nice when you're on a podcast where somebody knows things about you so they can ask you interesting questions. So as I'm Googling you, I find this thing in The Humanist and like peeled through all of these articles from 2016, 17, and 18. And there were some pretty good ones. I actually appreciated your point of view. The one that I really liked the most was, and I'll pull it up, dude, the fallacy of armed populace as a deterrent. That disarming a population is part of a process of tyranny, but it's not the most critical part. Silencing free speech, preventing assembly, circumventing due process, and alienating people from politics all take priority.
That's why it's the First Amendment, not the second one.
I completely agree. And as I was reading through all your stuff, I really appreciated your take on everything.
I mean, I don't want to digress. I'm anti-Second Amendment. And when I say that, and it's because I don't think it protects our freedom well enough. Mm-hmm. They mention militias and things that have no bearing on your right as a human being to defend yourself with a weapon commensurate to the threat you're likely to face. Mm-hmm. And I think it needs to be scrapped and it needs to be rewritten. Because right now, the Second Amendment is a privilege that's granted us by the government that they can take away at any time if you were convicted of a felony. Now, there are times when our rights need to be suspended through mental illness or if you're a violent criminal.
Sure.
But it's not. Let's not treat it like a right if it's not a right. Right now, it's a privilege.
The way I always thought about the Bill of Rights is these are not rights granted to me by the government. These are rights granted to me by God.
Yes.
Right. So the right to bear arms is not granted to me by the government, even though they have been overreaching in the way that they've done it. And they have the NFA and this and all. They basically pulled all these rights back. It's like the free speech stuff. Like, yeah, you have the right to free speech, but I also have the right to think you're an asshole if you say it. You also don't have a right to go into a movie theater and scream fire, which is the classic one.
There's limits to every right.
Yeah, there is. But like this is another weird one. Like you don't need my permission to live your life living in the pursuit of happiness. You have the right to live your life unabated of me. But I also have the right to not agree with your life and to think that you're an asshole and maybe I don't understand it.
It's the essence of freedom.
Yeah. So the fact that like people are like, hey, you have to acknowledge my right. I acknowledge your right. If I don't understand it or I think it's weird or more importantly, I don't agree with it, then like that doesn't stop you from living you. You don't need me to co-sign. I don't ask your permission to live my life.
You know, they almost put on the third one, the right to property instead of pursuit of happiness. Yeah. And they changed it because they realized, they were smart enough to realize that means somebody has to provide you with something.
Well, it was John Locke.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, and property was John Locke. And then Thomas Jefferson changed it to pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. It's just to me, my test of freedom is freedom doesn't exist unless somebody is uncomfortable. If everybody, then it's just cultural uniformity. You know, if everybody's living the same life, unless somebody's doing something that makes you a little uncomfortable, you don't like, and you tolerate that and you protect their right to do that, then it's not really true freedom. It's just cultural uniformity. So just the fact that you don't like guns or you don't like people that cross-dress or whatever, it's part of freedom, man. You know what I mean? And so I'm big on maximizing freedom. And there's always going to be a balance between safety and freedom. Sure. You cannot have ultimate safety and also have ultimate freedom. And if you want ultimate freedom, it's going to be a pretty unsafe society. I mean, it just is because people you're going to have to accept some risks, man.
Yeah. Well, it'd be kind of like, ultimate freedom that you could go buy a nuclear weapon. And then like, now I have to trust that you're not going to get drunk and just set it off.
Okay. I don't want to go down the gun route too much, but
so Power Athlete Radio, basically batting the bullshit, whatever. It's a performance-based podcast, but I am an educated individual like you. And so this conversation is probably more exciting to me than talking about sets and reps. So that's why when I clicked into your humanness, Dale, and I was reading through, I got so excited to do this podcast because if you and I were sitting here talking about arguing between, is it 4 reps or 5 reps, or is it 10 reps or 12 reps? I'm going to literally stab myself in the deal. And, we do have this kind of weird shared bonding deal where now you get to see a little bit of the insanity of CrossFit from like a different side.
I wasn't fully aware.
No, I don't think you were until you posted that and you added me as the contributor. And then like all of a sudden we're like 275,000 views on that click. And I'm like, there's 530 comments. I'm like, oh my God.
CrossFit was always like the cute little kind of mentally challenged brother that you pat on the head. Like, you go get them, CrossFit. And then they like start to try to bite you and you're like, hold on. You need to put a muzzle on. I'm sorry. But safety first here. And it's like, I didn't understand fully the level and that still persists to this day.
Yeah. Dude, they're still commenting on this thing.
I know.
And like, I just, I ended up recording a podcast last week, kind of discussing a little bit with Arash, who's one of my training partners, like what had happened. And I'm sure like we posted it and I'm like, oh man, this thing's going to get sparked up again. It almost gets to the point where it's almost a little embarrassing where you're like, man, like just like go do your thing, man. I'm happy for you. Yeah. Like let me do my thing. I'm sorry I waded into your pool, and you know what? Like just like go get fit. Do what you got to do.
That dude that did the YouTube on us, like I don't know his name, but like
Hiller.
Yeah, I'm like the dude spent hours.
It was 40 minutes, dude.
Yeah, but like all the research and the deep dives into my content he did, so he could cherry pick what he wanted. I'm like, you spent hours on this, bro. I'm like, I was actually impressed. I'm like, good for you, man. That must have like rubbed you the wrong way to dedicate. I would never dedicate that much time to CrossFit.
No, because you have other things to do. You train, like you have, obviously the business, like all the things that you do. I'm like, that's kind of what I said in there. I'm like, dude, I'm a father of 3. I'm married. I like to weld. I like to build trucks, which you saw. Like I've been working on this property. Like there's like 4,000 other things that I need to be doing, more so than sitting on the internet dissecting some guy's argument to create my own. And it's just like, it's too much.
Yeah. It's like, well, whatever floats your boat, I guess. You know what I mean? But there's no way I'm going to dedicate that much energy. At the end of the day, I don't care that much. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if you believe it's the best thing ever, good for you. And my favorite thing is when they challenge me to do the CrossFit Open to prove my athleticism. I'm like, well, if I postulated that speed walking wasn't the be all end all of athleticism, and you challenged me to a speed walking contest, you would beat me at speed walking.
Yeah.
Like I would not win the CrossFit Open because in my opinion, I don't train for it because in my opinion, it's not the be all end all of athleticism.
Yeah.
It is very hard and good for you guys for doing it. And first of all, most of the people in that Open are former athletes that were developed using other systems that then built work capacity on top of that.
I did a consult yesterday for a guy who was a college football player, got into CrossFit, competed in the CrossFit Games, did a whole bunch of stuff, and now has transitioned into high rocks. So we were kind of going through all the high rocks and like how he should train. And, you know, he's a little too big. He's like 6'4", 225, 230. And I was like, dude, the standard CrossFitter that wins the game is between like 5'6" and 5'10". They weigh between 185 and 205 pounds.
Because it's built on reps.
Well, yeah.
You know, it's like, and if you're 6'5", you literally have to do more work and move things further to get that rep. It's not like strongman. Strongman's the opposite. Yeah. If you're taller, you have an advantage.
Yes.
It's anything built on repetitions. It's like, well, it's the biomechanics of that body.
Dude, when you're 6'5", the distance you have to travel is a lot different than 5'6". It was like when I did the CrossFit Games, I'm out there doing deadlifts and burpees with Chris Spieler, who's like 5'4", 135 pounds. And he's smashing me at 6'5". Like
he's literally moved that bar, whatever it is, dude, 3 meters less than you have.
And it was, he smashed me. And dude, like just to get my 310 pound ass off the ground that many times, why this dude it was insane.
I want to go into taller athletes versus shorter athletes as far as like how you train them. So we are obsessed with bar speed. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's a little bit more than that because you have to look at not just how fast the bar is moving, but if you look at, you know, a lever, like let's say a femur, and that's the lever, and then how far that is perpendicularly to gravity from their center of mass is the moment arm, right? So to move for a taller athlete to move the bar the same distance, that lever arm increases to the same joint angle at a faster rate than a shorter athlete. So their moment arm increases faster. So the taller athlete is literally experiencing more force to move the bar the same speed than a shorter athlete. Mm-hmm. So you have to spend longer with taller athletes developing a strength base so they can handle those forces. Because if a guy lowers the same bar a foot, but his femur is longer and it has to move back longer, the moment arm increased faster and they generated force faster. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of considerations that go into training people based on their natural build that we have to consider, and we can't train all athletes the same.
Yeah, well, anthropometrical ratios matter.
They really do.
Yeah, I mean, it's you bring in a guy that's 6'9", 6'10". One of the guys I do jits with is like 6'9", 6'10". When we were in there training, like he's like, man, it's really hard for me to pull a barbell off the ground. I was like, yeah, you think? So I had these. So for me, one of the sticking points for me on the deadlift is always 4 inches off the ground. Yeah. Right? Like for me, I can always pull a bar, but it's basically that 4 inch. Once I get to the knees, I'm fine. Yeah. It's always there. So we bought these huge kind of Mark Bell wagon wheels. Yeah. And they basically start the bar 4 inch off the ground. So it's like my natural weak point. And so he comes over and he pulls it and he's like, oh my God, this is so much easier. And he's like, man, I've been pulling this bar. It's so this. I'm like, dude, you're like 6'9", 6'10".
Because you're going off an arbitrary standard.
Yeah. I was like, just some guy arbitrarily picked what 45s are. So he got those and his fucking deadlift shoot up. And I'm like, Marty, like this is where like this thing gets a little ridiculous. Like if you're a big dude or you have some specific, like, Victor Hugo, who just won the big main event for the UFC Fight Pass in Vegas on Thursday. Victor's got some L4, L5 issues. So any form of cervical loading kind of shut him down. Yeah. So what do? We just did belt squat. And dude, the guy's got like 9 fucking plates on each side of this belt squat, just hammering it.
Because his whole point is to make himself a better fighter, not a better weightlifter.
Yeah. Dude, I can't do what he does on the weight. I can squat way more weight. I can't do what he does on the belt squat. And he's killing it. And like people ask me, I'm like, well, dude, if cervically loading his spine with a barbell on his back hurts and shuts him down, then why am I going to do that? Mm-hmm. That's like the definition of insanity, doing it over and over again, expecting a different response.
Axial loading isn't a crucial part of most combat sports, unless you're, literally picking somebody up and carrying. It is for like firefighting. Yeah. Like if you can't axial load and you're a firefighter, that's kind of a big deal. Yeah. But for a fighter, like it's not, you know how frustrating it was that I had to spend so much time, like I had some athletes with scoliosis and things like that, training them on the back squat to try to build them up for an arbitrary lift that I knew they didn't even need to do, but they had to do it because for some reason we believe that if you can't back squat, you can't play football. Yeah. And he wanted to play at SMU and his spine was like this. Yeah. And months building up so he could tolerate a heavy load in back squat, which was completely arbitrary to the sport of football. Yeah. And I did it because I knew I was like, they're not going to let you on the team if you can't back squat. So you got to be able to back squat.
Yeah.
And at the same time, every day, it's like there's other stuff that we could, just like training kids for the NFL Combine.
Yeah.
It's like there's other stuff we can be doing that would make you a better football player to help you make a team. And I have to dedicate so much time being very specific to get you a good combine number.
Yeah.
Well,
it's training for the world's biggest fashion show, as I used to call it.
God, man,
I went in and worked with Dave Spitz's guys for the Combine a couple of years ago. And I remember telling them, I'm like, this isn't football. This is the world's biggest fashion show. Now we're going to train you for the fashion show. But the day that it's over, nobody's ever going to ask you to ever do any of these things again. And there's a completely different set of training that evolves. How do I basically go out and be a starter in the NFL?
Exactly.
And, and the problem is that there's so much historical accuracy in the NFL that these coaches and these scouts and GMs, whatever, they want to bet on sure things. So they know that if this guy was a great player, here are his stats in this. And what they're trying to do is find people that fit within this bucket. It's like I was watching the other day, the top offensive lineman, I forgot where he plays at, but they were complaining that he has short arms. Right. So they're like, he's never going to be able to play tackle with his short arms because all these guys have longer arms. But then if you watch him play, he plays real high in his hips. So he's going to, and they're like, well, his arms are short. They're going to have to move him inside to guard, which is funny because playing guard, you can't have short arms either. But the thing that's interesting is he was real stiff. He's real high. Like he doesn't have a lot of mobility in his hips. At guard, you got to be able to kind of sink and be low if you're a little smaller like I did.
Yeah.
Or you're just 360 pounds and you're a fucking mountain and they can't get around you.
Yeah.
Right. But if you have to be flexible to play guard, and they were like, oh, he's, real high hipped. He's short arm. He's never going to play. We're going to have to move him inside. But then they're like, he doesn't have the flexibility to play inside. But then again, when I'm watching film, this dude's killing people. And I'm like, instead of stacking him up against all these arbitrary numbers,
that's crazy. Why don't
you just let, but they don't want to put a lot of money in. I mean, it's this potential deal. It's, I was watching it and I'm watching the guy's film. I'm like, his film's pretty fucking good, dude. At the end of the day, these numbers are fine, but what does the film look like?
Yeah. It is funny because it's eye-opening when you see the stats of the combine compared to the success of the NFL and how poorly it correlates. There is a range, right? But with a receiver, and the very fastest receivers don't tend to do that well because usually to be that fast and that elite, you have to be built in a certain way where you can accelerate, or I guess acceleration is both speed up and slow down, but whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Accelerate really well, but your ability to decelerate is a little bit compromised.
Yeah.
And everybody knows as a receiver to run good routes, your ability to decelerate quickly.
Yeah.
So it's almost like if you get below that 4.4 range and you're a true burner, your versatility in the NFL as a receiver is a little bit limited because it kind of tells me in order to be that fast, maybe your deceleration.
Or you're small.
Yeah. Or you're,
or you're 5'8" and 154
so
pounds.
I'm not saying speed doesn't matter,
do it.
But is that extra tenth of a second really that crucial? Now, obviously don't want a receiver out there running a 4.8, but I'm pretty sure Jerry Rice ran a 4.6 or something at the combine.
Yeah. But you have to remember too, his precision in how he ran routes and his movement from point A to point B and his ability to get open, the best in the world. I don't think anybody ever watched, and this was interesting. The story goes, Bill Walsh I think he was at the Senior Bowl or so, I forgot what it was. He was somewhere and he turned on the TV in his hotel room and they had, Jerry Rice playing, it was a historical black college they played at. And they what was it? Mississippi, I'm gonna mess it up. So he's down there.
Mississippi Valley?
Yes, Mississippi Valley. So he turns it on and he sees Jerry Rice on TV and was just like, oh my God, we're drafting this guy. And then his combine numbers are really average. And he's like, doesn't matter, we're taking this guy.
Joe Montana's combine numbers were average.
I mean,
that dude, we forget how
Tom
mobile.
Brady.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't mean that those things don't matter, but we have to put their performance on the field first. So,
the GMs, the owners, and the scouts, most of them, I mean, there's a few, there's John Lynch, there's some guys that played the game at a high level. Most of those guys did not play. And the problem is that because they don't know the intangibles, because I don't think they did the job. I played for coaches that never played in the NFL, that played football at maybe college, lower levels. And I played for guys that were high level players. Ron Rivera. I mean, guys that played with the best of the best. I mean, Ron Rivera played opposite. Mike Singletary. Played. Yeah, I mean, so dudes that were legit cats. Those guys had a completely different approach to this thing and a different mindset. And it was you know what, you're a pro, you know what to do. If you can't, we're going to get somebody else in. And there was just a very different thing. So I feel like a lot of these guys, they don't want to bet on somebody because if they're wrong, they want to keep their job. So it's all cover your ass. Well, he had all the numbers. This guy had these numbers. He was great. He wasn't this. And I think what it is they just lose the intangibles. I mean, like the kid from Arizona State, the running back.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember his name either.
Yeah.
I mean, that kid in that championship game was throwing up, like was having to go in and out. I mean,
Scatterboo.
Yeah, but isn't he like 5'8"?
Yeah, he's pretty short.
Yeah, he's like 5'8", like 225. I would draft that dude. I want him on my team.
Exactly.
Just for the fact that guy runs the rock. He plays hard. I'm interested to see how he does. College has a little bit different. Now all of a sudden you're getting like dudes in their late 20s and 30s, men with mortgages and divorces and alimony and this, which fucking makes dudes real angry. People are always like, man, where does the intensity and the anger come from? I'm like, it comes from a mortgage and a few divorces and maybe some alimony.
Yeah.
Like I always tell the story about Keith Hamilton, who I played against, who played at the Giants. He had a bunch of like his kids' faces tattooed all over him. And I remember playing against him and seeing the kids' faces. And then I think I asked Strahan later, I was like, man, what's up with all the kid faces? He's like, he has to pay alimony. So every time he looks at him, he gets fucking mad. And he's like, that's his fuel. And then I was like, well, how old are, and I guess his kids were in their like teens and 20s. So like, these were their baby pictures and he was still, and I remember being like the Bobby Boucher, this is my tackle and fuel.
That's so awesome.
But I was playing and Keith Hamilton was probably one of the best people I ever played against. And oddly enough, he's not in the Hall of Fame, which he should be. But man, that guy was like the hammer, dude. He was a beast. And I just remember seeing those pictures and being like, that's a motherfucker, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I think height is one of those things. In most positions in the NFL, it's a little bit overrated. With some of the best linebackers in history were under 6 foot tall. The best quarterbacks in history.
I played against Zach Thomas.
Yeah.
And dude, they had him listed at 5'10" in the program. Yeah. I don't think he was 5'10".
Yeah. I mean, the skill of football is going to trump anything else that you can come up with.
Like Pepper Johnson. I mean, some of those guys.
All those Saints linebackers were all short. A lot of them were short. Sam Mills, I think, was really short.
Yeah.
Sam Mills has a great story, actually. I love that guy's story. You talk about perseverance to get in the league. He's the guy that had to go play in the CFL for a long time, right? That's, great story. But,
no, I mean, so they call these guys outliers. But outliers are the guys that make it to the Hall of Fame and like change the game. Like the left tackle for the Eagles, the big dude from he's either New Zealand or Australia that they got, was a rugby guy and they brought him in to play. He never played offensive line, and he's 6'8", 360. And it was pretty interesting that the coach is developing him, and they were like, this guy's got like this, and when you're 6'8", 360, your margin of error is pretty big. Like, and if you're fairly athletic, and he's athletic, but it was pretty interesting. Like just watching him in his set, when he sets back, right, he like kicks his leg back, he gets this arch, and he like, as he's kicking, there's like this like hip extension arching back that is very rare to see in offensive linemen. Jonathan Ogden used to do it. Like I've seen guys do it, and very few people can. And it was something that I saw. Like, so when I came in the NFL, I was playing tackle, and they gave me all of these films, and like I was watching all these guys to play tackle, and finally I went up and knocked on my coach's door, and I was like, hey, do you have any like 6'5" white dudes I can watch? Because you're showing me like these 6'8", 360 pound black dudes. Yeah. Like, do you have any dudes that kind of like look like me? Yeah. And he was like, yeah, that's
a good point.
Yeah, sure. Like, hold on. And he gave me all these cut-ups.
He's a Berkeley guy. He's a smart guy.
So he gives me Zimmerman. He gives me Jim Lachey. He gives me Jumbo Elliott, and like some like Tunch Jilkin, and starts giving me all these dudes that like, I'm like a 6'5.5", 310 pound, 308 pound white dude. And so he's showing me guys that are about my size, and I was like, okay, like I can do this. Yeah. What you were showing me is like these dudes are mountains moving, like watching Jordan Wall I think. I'm gonna butcher his last name. Sorry, dude. Incredible athlete. So like watching him just do that one set that he could do, that was something that I saw. And like people are like, oh, he's talking to this. I'm like, hey, dude, that guy got arch in his chest and his back off of his first kick. That's fucking rare to see. And I only saw that in like some of the best to ever do the game. Now, the guys that I watched, like Jumbo and those guys, like there was a set that they did and they vertical set, but that was super impactful for me, is being able to like look at guys instead of, and then I developed technique off of that. Like, this works for those dudes. I'm going to do it more so than like you're teaching one technique.
Yeah.
Like how Jordan plays at 6'8", 360 wasn't how I could play. Yeah. So I think what happens, and to kind of weave this back, when you're talking about linebackers or different people, I mean, there was LeVon Kirkland played a certain way. Mm-hmm. There's ways that, like, you know, Zach Thomas played, and these guys that was unique to them, different than a 6'4", you know, really like a taller linebacker. Mm-hmm. These dudes would literally bend their knees and they would like almost cheat themselves behind like the 3 technique or the 1.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they hard, they would scrape and you wouldn't see them, and then you would see them and they would surprise you.
So it's cool because there's commonalities in athleticism and movement patterns that span all sports that we can see. But also there's different strategies to achieve the same thing that aren't right or wrong, that people just employ a lot of times intuitively based on their own biomechanics and strengths and weaknesses. That exposure and practice in that sport will teach them, hopefully with the aid of like a good coach or mentor. But it's the rigid thinking that there's this one right way to move and we have to move this way. That should form a good template off common human movement patterns. But then we have to accept the variances in movements. It's pretty beautiful that people can figure stuff out. Sure. It's just like sprinting. If you look at 5 sprinters running 100 meter, they all look a little bit different. Yeah. There are commonalities, but you can, like, people like to rag on Usain Bolt. I'm like, that dude is doing the perfect thing for his body type. It's not good for you.
I don't know anybody that rags on that dude.
Well, I live in the sprinting world, and they're like, well, if he would have just done this, he'd have been even faster, because he has a lot of like hip movement in his first
especially
steps.
in the start.
Yeah, and he runs with kind of a high chest towards the end, and he runs with a little bit too much plantar flexion according to them. Yep. I'm like, all of those things are unique to his body, and that, you know, that rotation of his pelvis around his long axis increases his stride length a little bit. He is able to generate a lot of foot speed still with some plantar flexion. Yeah. So it gives him a longer lever. You know, his ability, he's still strong enough to, like, at the end, let his chest get pulled up and still maintain pelvic stability. Yeah. You're not Usain Bolt. You should run different than him.
Well, a lot of these guys start fast, and then it's almost a speed deficit, like how long they can kind of keep it. He actually was accelerating, like he started slow and then all of a sudden started getting momentum and using his longer limbs. I love watching him sprint, but like, honestly, to me, watching the Olympics, especially like the 100, the 200 and the 400, is like hurdles. I mean, that stuff to me is, even though it's hard to judge athleticism running in a straight line, sure, it's still the expression of speed. I would rather watch that any day of the week.
When you break it down in slow motion and watch it stride by stride, it's one of the most amazing and beautiful things. Yeah. Full speed humans running on 2 feet is just the things that have to occur. Sprinting is one of the most beautiful things to me, and it's not what people think. There's a lot of torque and coil and crossing your midline and wrapping around your center line, and people that teach speed with a straight up torso and this arm swing. I'm like, that's not how fast people run, man. I really had to learn the art of sprinting when I became a speed coach. Yeah. And I thought I knew a lot going into it, and I didn't know anything. I had to really analyze it and learn. A
lot of that came from Michael Johnson. You know, the 90-90.
I know, he was
I mean, but you're talking about just a phenomenal, like this is the hard part. It's hard to build a framework and an architecture and a template on people that are so genetically gifted. When you watch him run, his legs move and he was literally straight up and down, and it was 90-90-90. And like, I remember watching him run in those gold shoes in, what was that? Like was that the Seoul Games? Like that he wore the gold shoes and set the world record. But like, his running, like there was almost no upper body lean. There was no like movement. He was just like, and they built that entire 90-90 thing off of him. And he had the perfect anthropometrical ratios to be able to run that way. But like, there's only one of him. So to build a system and to basically buy into this dogma based upon that seems crazy to me.
My knock on him is he rags on a lot of other sprinters, and he can't see how special he was. Maybe he's changed, but I remember him saying things about other sprinters. Yeah. And I'm like, you were kind of an enigma, man. Like,
he's an anomaly.
Yeah, anomaly. Yeah, not enigma.
Every time I hear the word enigma, I think of Batman. You remember with Jim Carrey, like the enigma,
enigma wrapped in a riddle.
Yes.
I mean, like, you can't impose what you did onto other people. It just doesn't work. Yeah. And I see a lot of good athletes that make horrible coaches because they first of all just assume people can pick stuff up intuitively like they can, and they assume the way that worked for them will work for everybody.
Yeah.
And they just fail in that analysis.
They fail at the margins of their experience.
Yeah. That's true.
I'm not kidding you, dude. For as much as we like grief as we were kind of throwing at CrossFit and Glassman, that statement that he made that people fail at the margins of their experience, and I give full attribution to Greg Glassman for this, and like that statement, I use that constantly to explain what I see in the world. Like, don't fail at the margins of your experience. So then you have to extend your experience, but people do it over and over again, and you see it, and it goes through my head, and I go, God damn.
The sad thing though is like he couldn't see the own margins of the CrossFit experience. He couldn't see it. He thought that CrossFit had no margins of experience.
Well, it had no margin of failure, so that it was this infinite deal. But I think what was interesting, and like to kind of pull that back to him a little bit, in around 2002, in the early days of CrossFit, Greg brought in a bunch of SMEs, right? He had Chris Summers, who we're going to have on the podcast, who's a gymnastics body who trains high-level gymnasts. He brought in, Coach Bergner to Olympic lift, and Coach Ripto to, for strength, and
good for him for doing that.
Yeah. So the idea was that if the system grows, you have to bring out experts who are subject matter experts in certain elements to be able to continue to drive this. And he brought in all of these people, and the thought was genius.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to bring in and we're going to create this coalition of individuals. He brought in Louis Simmons and Nicholas Romanoff from Pose. Myself came in, and there was other people that he brought in. And the idea was that there was going to be this like brain kind of collaboration of individuals that were going to push human performance out past. And then as they came in and they were, started being like, well, I have a problem with this, or this doesn't work, or this and this. What happened was he realized that like they were, as they should, trying to expand this and add some pieces. Guys like Rob Wolf, who they brought in, like, hey, here's a problem. Like, you can't teach people. And at my first level 1, they came in and they talked about every athlete, from grandma to the professional athlete, needs to be eating his own diet. And you can zone on beer, potato chips, and beef jerky. This was literally the talk. Like, this isn't hyperbole. This isn't anything crazy. They said, verbatim, as long as you eat in the zone, you are performance dieting, and everybody needs to eat this way. And they made these statements. And then Rob comes in and he's like, food quality trumps eating in the zone. Right. So, but if you can start managing your macros, and then they found this way to kind of tweak the zone to make it better, to increase the protein in this. And like, it was, so you had all these people that saw the framework, came to it with this kind of benevolent idea of like, I'm going to improve this because this is what I brought. And then when it started to kind of grow past what it originally was intended, they kind of did this 180. And they went back in 06, 07, and they started going back to like this original doctrine. And that original doctrine from 2002 in those early days is what they pivoted back to. They pushed all these people out, and this became like, the Quran in a way, where it's like, there's nothing before us. This is the original word, and there's nothing. So then all these people peel out, and a lot of these people still buy into this original doctrine that was never allowed to grow. It'd be kind of like in, I always ask people with, Christianity, would it change Christianity if Jesus rose on the 4th day? Would it change Christianity if like the villagers moved the rock and went and got him? Would it changed if he never went out into the garden and, prayed to his father, do you want me to do this the night before he was arrested? I mean, like, what if this story would change, or the fact that if you look at like Seneca and Jesus both lived about the same time, they both preached almost identical doctrines, right? One is the Son of God, and one's a philosopher we still read. But like, does it change the word anymore? And I wonder if the message would have been as clear, even if these people had been allowed to contribute their piece and they didn't have to like pull it back.
Man, that's a great thought right there. And it's sad that, because that's so genius to bring in people that are smarter than you in topics.
Yeah.
And you just,
the age old, I stand on the shoulders of giants.
I mean, yeah, I didn't invent anything. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing in this world that I talk about that hasn't been taught. And I'm proud to say with no shame that all I do is I repackage it and I give it to people in a way that they can digest it maybe. Yeah. Like, there's nothing I've come up with and all of the exercises I do, they're just movements that have already been done. Yeah. And I'm just giving you options.
And variations.
And I'm not even saying you need to do most of those things, or any if you don't want to, but it's just an option for you to do that adds value if you can't do something else. I just want to give people options. So the thing about CrossFit too is they like constantly varied. But if you look at their exercise selection list, it's not all that varied. it's maybe I can pick out 24 exercises and throw them on a board, and that's 90% of what CrossFit does. It's like there's just not enough variance there. It's the thing you say, there's not enough true intensity, and there's really not enough variance. So if you take out the constantly varied, progressively varied maybe, and you actually do high intensity at the proper doses, it's a pretty good formula, but like you said, man, it's just like, you can't do that much volume at that intensity because it ceases to be intense. And here's the thing. People that aren't athletes, they start doing CrossFit and they've never worked out like that before. So it's a novel stimulus. They're working out harder. So there's somebody who says you're just working hard.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah. And they're actually doing it in a rep range like we talked about where it's pretty good for hypertrophy.
Yeah.
So
45, like a 21-15-9, it's 45 reps of each movement. You think about 5 sets of 8.
That results in hypertrophy.
Yeah.
So like they think a power clean is a power movement. No, it could be used to develop power. But if you do 30 reps of it, it's more of a muscular endurance hypertrophy movement at that part because you're not really developing your power past a base level, right? So, they end up getting pretty big, fairly strong and pretty lean. And the zone diet, what it does is it just results in calorie control. They don't overeat. So they get lean, they get bigger muscles, and wow, look how well CrossFit looks.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, they're not performance-based athletes. You're looking at somebody assuming they're an athlete. And it's just like when you go in, I almost came to blows with this lady doctor one time. This is years ago. She was French and football was playing in the back. And she was like going on and on about how football players weren't athletes. And I was like, why aren't they an athlete? She's like, well, look how fat they are. I'm like, you can't be a fat and be an athlete. So I'm like, sumo wrestlers aren't athletes? She's like, no. I'm like, so you need to be ripped to be an athlete? She's like, yes. I'm like, well, what? She's a doctor. I'm like, what are the characteristics of an athlete to you? And I'm like, you're a doctor. Like,
yeah, but you have to remember too, I have friends that I wouldn't pay to cut my lawn that are doctors, like guys I went to school with. And the issue is like, one, they don't understand that piece. It's basically, they're looking for pathology and, better living through pharmacology. They don't, doctors aren't movement experts. That's why they reach out to us.
As soon as you put the DR in front of somebody's name, everybody just assumes they know everything about everything.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and like you started to go into the detail and the art of playing offensive lineman. And I don't know if there's like, in some regards, there's 2 better athletes on the field than offensive and defensive linemen because the athleticism you have to display in a confined environment with massive loads coming at you from different angles that you have to react to very quickly. A lot of it is feel because you can't see. And the athleticism in American football is profound. And it just bothers me that people that have never played a sport can look at it and make judgments on that sport, like
they fail to margins of experience.
Exactly.
It's one of those statements that just like quantifies so much. I do want to peel this back to the humanist because as much as I love talking about training, but we got into that. We were getting a little bit of the Second Amendment stuff, which I thought was great. But like going through these different articles, one, I appreciate the fact that you have an opinion on, like coming from your background. Obviously, played college football and then get out and you end up joining the military and going on. And I believe you were a Ranger Tab.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you went on. And so for those of you guys that, can look that stuff up, had tours in Afghanistan.
Yep. 1 in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Yeah.
2 in Iraq. How did that change or like really formulate? Playing from college football, there's obviously a training system that you have, and then getting in, into the military is obviously much different, especially in where were you 18th Airborne Corps?
No, it was 10th Mountain. I think they might have been part of 18th Airborne Corps, but then I was a 3rd Ranger, which was just part of JSOC, attached to JSOC.
So how did the training change, and more importantly, like how did your kind of approach to physical preparedness and readiness kind of change, obviously from college football and evolve into going into military and then going in harm's way?
So I think if we're smart, we learn more from our failures than our successes. Yeah. And I had a really embarrassing, eye-opening moment in Ranger Regiment where I knew I had to run consistently and hard to be able to keep up with these guys. Like, I was a pretty fast runner in 10th Mountain. When I got to Ranger Regiment, if you're running a sub or, above a 13-minute 2-mile, you were like in the remedial group. They're like, hey, man, you got to fix yourself. And there's a period of about 2 months where I kind of got away from some of my endurance training. And we went out and we did a long run in a weight vest followed by a rope climb. And I was the platoon leader. And I was the slowest one in my platoon by far. And they were waiting on me. and I cramped up afterwards. It was an eye-opening and embarrassing moment where it's like, I have to completely change the way I train. And, you know, you adapt to the demands imposed upon you. And it really drove home the fact that, like, it doesn't matter how big and strong you are. If you don't train to meet the demands, you're going to be a hindrance. And then it also dawned on me, it's like, man, if this would have happened in combat, I could have gotten people killed. You know, I couldn't keep up, you know, or something, or I couldn't make good decisions because my glycogen stores just, you know, would get low. And it was a huge, and sometimes you need those moments, especially if you're thick-headed, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I came from a strength and conditioning background before that. So I was always like power and speed and strength and coordination.
Where did that come from? Was that a high school deal in college? Like how did, like what was your first exposure?
So I had a really good high school coach. You know, I was in bodybuilding, but then I had a really good high school coach that was ahead of the curve for
when did you start bodybuilding?
Well, I mean,
when did you start bodybuilding? I think
I bodybuilded after college, but I was a big fan of bodybuilding all through high school and college.
Yeah, dude, who doesn't? Like, I remember looking at bodybuilding magazines and like seeing Dorian Yates and being like, "Fuck!"
It's great. It's a window into it, just like CrossFit is a window potentially into the Olympic lifts. You know, it's a window into other things.
Sure.
And so I got into high school, though. It was a small town in Missouri, and my coach was way ahead of his time for what could be expected. You know, bigger, faster, stronger guy, but also like lots of plyometrics and medicine ball work, and I learned a lot from him. My college strength and conditioning was kind of a step back because it was a powerlifting background, so we did do the plyometrics and things like that. And then, you know, more into bodybuilding and competing bodybuilding in San Diego afterwards. So I'd been exposed to a lot of, you know, I had a degree in exercise science and all that. But I just couldn't wrap my head around like fully, even though I would say it, the said principle, it's that, and strength, I see strength coaches struggle with this when they go to train tactical athletes because they bring their presuppositions.
No, it's preconceived notions.
Preconceived notions to an environment that they're not familiar with and where they could just study that environment. You know, so they try to focus on things for these tactical athletes in doses that they don't need. They try to make them really strong, really powerful, really fast, where they need a little bit of that. And they make sure that they're fueled and they're well slept. Like we would train an athlete that wants to perform the best, but you have to expose them and their systems to what they actually need and the doses they need. So they need a little bit of all that other stuff. They do need a ton of work capacity. Yeah. They need a ton of being able to just keep going in that zone 2 range. I know it's arbitrary. Yeah. When they don't have proper fuel, when they're slightly dehydrated, and the only way to train that is to expose people to it. And they cannot wrap their heads around that. And so people will come to me and like, hey, I did this up for a tactical athlete. I'm like, ditch it, man. I'm like, that's not what they need. I don't care if a dude can vertical jump 35 inches in Ranger Regiment. He probably needs to be able to vertical jump 26 inches, you know, and he needs a weight vest on and he needs to be walking, you know, and he needs to be able to think when he's mentally and physically exhausted. So you have to incorporate cognitive tasks into his training. And they're very good at that, you know, just intuitively. And then the opposite, people come from a tactical background working with athletes and they try to pose their stuff on top of them and make it suck and make them suffer. And maybe that plays a small role, just like the vertical jumping and the power and everything plays a small role in tactical athletes. That's not what they need. You know what I mean? They don't need a suck fest every time you get there. So, and just listening to like NCOs that when I was there that might not have had the degrees that I had, but had a lot of practical experience in getting Rangers ready for combat. And just not assuming just because I had a degree, I knew more than these guys. So that's basically it. It was just like humble yourself and learn from your failures, and that not everything's going to be ideal, and sometimes you have to train in less than ideal conditions to prepare yourself for it. So you can't get to an objective with just enough left in the tank to do the objective. You know what I mean? You got to get there, and if they say all of a sudden the objective moved and you got to walk another 10 miles, well, put your fucking ruck on and walk 10 more miles. You know, that's the biggest thing. So work capacity, you know, is very important for tactical athletes. I
remember Andy Stumpf, who's a, you know, former dev group guy, buddy of ours, when we started training together, I asked him, I'm like, what are the demands? And he's like, helicopter drops us off. We have to hike 5 to 10 clicks through the mountains with 90 pounds of rockets on my back. I have to be able to drop it and get in the fight, sprint, and then try to get out there and then hike back. So like I need to have good endurance to be able to carry heavy things, drop it, have enough capacity to be able to run in there, fight for 3 to 5 minutes, and then get the back out. How do you train for that? And I was like, I have no idea, but we're going to figure it out. We'll figure it the fuck out. And
just reverse engineer shit, you know? Yeah. So, and here's the thing, like CrossFit people, if they're listening to this, they probably aren't by now, but...
You think that you think they're tired of it, or you think that they just keep eating it up and just
like fuming, you know?
They're just like at home storming around, just like
writing their manifesto.
Yeah, like just trying on their nanos, just making sure they got the right Metcons.
That's awesome. Yeah, we should make combat boots. Metcons should make combat boots.
Yeah, or you know, everybody's just trying on their Rich Froning headbands. You know, it's another one. Like
yeah, it's a cult. But so they're going to listen to that, and I say work capacity, like see CrossFit. I'm like, okay, but you're not going to want to hear this. CrossFit isn't even the best way to train work capacity. It's just not, man. It's too high intense to train work capacity because you can't go in and do your hour workout. It's just and train work capacity.
Yeah, like you can't burn it to the ground. You're like working at maximum. No, I don't want to use the word intensity, but maximal, like towards your red line. You're basically redlining your car for 60 minutes.
It doesn't create the adaptations you want. And so, but it also, like you said, he need to be able to walk to an objective far away carrying weight, which his heart rate should never probably go over 120 beats per minute or whatever it is. Yeah. He should never like get close to his lactate threshold the entire time. But then when he gets on it, he needs to be really fast and really powerful for a brief amount of time.
Yeah.
CrossFit sucks at training both of those. When you're in the middle, you're not really optimally training either one.
Well, you brought up Charlie Francis. You know, you're in the no man's land. I mean, my conversation with Charlie was great. He's like, you know, where's strength built? Somewhere between 75 and 85, 90%. The majority of strength. You're going to see like 90% of your stuff. Where's speed built? Running faster than 92%. When you run faster than 90 and you're in there, or you're doing 75% recovery zones. So that was his deal, where it's like people try to equate speed and strength, and you train them very differently. If you use a strength template to train speed, you'll never get faster. And that was like brain bomb.
It's just like baseball players. They have them out there running gassers. I'm like, you'd be better off jogging slowly as a baseball player. You really would, because the interference effect is a little bit overrated, and baseball players need a little bit of that endurance. They kind of do know what they're doing, having baseball pitchers jog slowly for a long period of time.
Yeah.
It's better serving them than having them do gassers.
Yeah.
But also, you know, the middle isn't wasted depending on what you do. So CrossFitters like to hate on the zone 3. They say it's the gray area that does nothing.
Oh, do they really? Why?
Because
I've something I haven't heard.
I've recently learned this, and I did look it up. And they,
so what zone do they like? 4?
Well, first of all, we all know the zones are completely arbitrary.
Yes. And it's based off of your heart rate.
Yeah.
Well, but what's wild is when we had Joel Jameson on the podcast, and we were using his Morpheus. So the first thing we did is we did a max heart rate test. We did like a 4-minute ride, rested, and then we did fucking Tabata intervals. I got to like 199. Right. So I've been training way too low in the intensities. And so for my green zone on the Morpheus, it was like 91 to like 150. Right. Awesome. So like that's my zone. Yeah, and like, so then what I do is I try to keep it between like 140 and 147, like right in that zone. If I had used the 220 minus age times 70, I was like 119. I was so fucking low in the zones.
So where the zones were originally created, it was supposed to be zone 2 was supposed to be up to that area where you started to accumulate a little bit of lactate, right? All right. And zone 3 ended when you reached your onset of blood lactate. I can't remember what that stands for, but it's when it starts to shoot up, right? So that zone 3 is the gradual accumulation of lactate. And as you get in better shape, you can stay in that zone at a higher heart rate. Yeah. So when distance runners do tempo runs, they're at 85% of their max heart rate, which for most people would put them solidly in zone 4. Yeah. So people get very confused very easily, but the zones are completely arbitrary. It's not a good way to do it, but it's the way we have that people kind of have a picture of what I'm talking about.
So we had the strength coach for USA Triathlon on the podcast. And we were talking about his athletes, you know, in a triathlon in the sprint tries is like, you know, I think it's right around an hour, let's say, maybe a little bit lower, a little bit less. These guys are working at like anywhere from like 93 to 90% of their max heart rate for an hour straight.
And they can do that without accumulating lactate.
Well, but what they do is they process lactate so fast that they're basically working through it. So when I started training Victor and Philippe, one of the things which was interesting, we wore heart rate monitors, and I realized most of their training on the mat was in zone 2.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So and then it very was little in these higher intensities. So we started using what I call a superhuman protocol, where we were going through and using bike sprints because there was no eccentric load, ramping them up. And these guys were getting up to like 18 to 20 millimoles of lactate, and then popping them off the bike and then chasing them around, making them spell their name, ask them to do multiplication, ask them all these questions so that they were developing this kind of cognizant kind of ability to be able to think in the middle of these high lactate states. Yeah. And then Victor ended up winning the main event for the UFC Fight Pass on Thursday. He got done and they went to overtime, and I could see the look on his face, and I knew he was gassed.
So that's actually genius.
And then he goes out and he beats the dude. And then after we were talking about it, he's like, all I could hear was you screaming 550, 600, and all that bullshit. He's like, I knew I could do it. And it's because they had worked in these positions and they were able to be cognizant. And he goes and finishes the guy and does that. But I believe it comes from just being smart, because if you look at what they do, you're like, oh, this must be all zone 3, zone 4, but they're so good on the mat that their level of efficiency is so high that their heart rate never goes too up. But the match was like 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's the thing. One of the tricks of fighting is being relaxed enough where you don't put yourself in that situation too soon. Yeah. But what you did was genius, because lactate is not a waste product. It's a fuel.
It's a fuel.
It's a very valuable fuel that our brains love and our heart loves. But we have to train ourselves to be able to use that.
Yes.
So that you can attack it from two ends. That's why most of the training does need to be zone 2, because it's developing the system so that you don't start to produce lactate until a higher heart rate. Yep. But then it's also on the other end, developing the systems to be able to use lactate better as a fuel once you develop it. Yep. So you have to train both ends. So that's why for a lot of people, that traditional zone 3 is actually very valuable, because it pushes you right up to that point where you're going to want to start to produce lactate, and it gets you better at both things at once. So not producing lactate too soon, but being able to deal with a little bit of lactate when you produce it. Yeah. Because if you go too high, you can't sustain that effort long enough for your systems to be able to get good at using it. So if you're in zone 4, whatever the fuck that means, too much, you don't give yourself enough time in that zone. Yeah. Now, for a lot of athletes, the zone 3 isn't that important. But if you're an endurance-based athlete, you do need some time in zone 3. And what I mean by zone 3 is not a heart rate based thing, because that's individual. It's where you have a little bit of lactate in that system, but you're still predominantly aerobically based, and you're dealing with a little bit of lactate. So you can extend the bout to 30 to 40 minutes. And people just don't understand, understanding the metabolic systems is very important. And how to train it differently depending on what type of athlete you are. Yeah. But it's just frustrating.
And then also age. Early exposure. One of the things we found early on was that whatever training you did when you were younger kind of set these characteristics. Like we worked with a CrossFit athlete, China Cho, who was like a high level swimmer. The amount of volume that you're able to do in the pool, because it's kind of unweighted, like these people are just like metabolic monsters, because the amount of time, hours. Yeah. Like my daughter ended up swimming.
And also it's temperature controlled too. So you don't have to worry about overheating.
Yeah. 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 And think about like the calories that burn by trying to keep your body temperature warmer in a colder pool. I mean, there's all these things.
That's why water polo players are just freak athletes, like metabolically freak athletes.
I mean, just same with the swimmers. You bring like somebody that has that level of capacity from swimming, and then they come into something like CrossFit. Like the one thing that was interesting for me with the people that were the high level CrossFitters, like let's say like the Rich Fronings, the people on their Mount Rushmore, when you watch him do his movements, like let's say it's like whether it be, a pull up or whatever he's doing, as like he gets done and he transitions to the next movement or rest or stops or whatever, there's like no distress on his face. Yeah. Like he's not like, people are like see the like they're equating the speed and the volume of which he's doing something with a certain level of like you said, zone 3, zone 4. He's just trained to the point where he's so efficient to be able to do these movements that his heart rate's probably like 145, 150, 160 max.
He
And
did the
he's
opposite of what they said. He's actually now at lower intensity.
Yes.
He's learned to do what you do at high intensity. And made it low intensity.
So what's ramping you up at like 98% of your max heart rate, this dude's able to do it about 75%, and he's able to hold it and be consistent. So he figured out this idea of movement, of consistency, and he moves well. There's no wasted movement, and he's extremely efficient. And he found a way to just be able to train, because if he was training these upper registers where he was at 98% of his deal, he couldn't go in and do 50 workouts in 3 days.
One of my biggest issues with CrossFit, I'm big on speed. They stack speed. They add speed too quickly. They add speed before movement efficiency has been like established fully, because they start timing people and having to compete before they become very efficient movers. So it's just, they add speed on top of dysfunction, and they just do it faster and faster. And it's like, you look at, like you said,
that's the only way you get healthier. So literally, like, this is one of the comments that's in, if you go to the Instagram and this, if I can do a workout 2 seconds faster, I'm healthier than I was the day before.
Yeah, I know.
And then fitter. And then they end up kind of like doing this word exchange where they're exchanging fitness and health and longevity and this. And they keep like kind of playing this like almost like shell game with these words. And it's confusing. Like, as I'm reading it, I'm trying to follow it. And I like to think I'm somewhat intelligent, not a complete fucking moron. But as I'm reading it, I'm like, I can't understand how you're like conflaborating, or no, if that's even the right word, but you're like conflating, you're conflating these different words where you think that they become interchangeable, that somehow fitness and health and wellness and longevity and speed and this. I mean, it's just like these, like this merry-go-round and word salad. It's confusing and it's weird. And as as somebody who reads as a rhetoric major, I see it and I'm like, oh, this is like stabbing me in the face. And then they can't follow logical arguments because you guys were providing them logical arguments. Yeah. And then the minute that you provide them logic, which I think it's funny, DJ works for me. I think Jake had said it too. I'm like, you can't outlogic the internet. Like, this is an illogical place that survives on basically on emotions and fairy dust and hopes and dreams. You can't bring logic here.
I don't know how people, they would say, you're getting so emotional about this based on what I write. I'm like, well, there's actually no emotion here.
No, they do that. That's a
projection.
Yeah, well, it's more than that. It's in argument, there's certain things that you can do to, like, I think they call it gaslighting now, but you say certain things like, I know you're not really an expert, or you say things to be in like, I can tell this is making you emotional, or you should really go talk to somebody who's more intelligent. I mean, like, there's these little kind of slipping jabs that are like offering suggestions to help you be a better person, but what they're really doing is they're dismantling you. Yeah. They're like backhanded in a fucking ways. Totally. Greg was a master of the backhanded compliment. Yeah, totally. I've never seen anybody give backhanded compliments better than Greg Glassman. He's a fucking 99 level wizard of this stuff.
There's one thing that's floating over all this is narcissism, man. And it's just narcissistic traits. Yeah, is what it is. They have a playbook and they follow it almost intuitively, but you're absolutely right. They plant seeds with narcissism.
You bring up a good point about narcissism. The one thing which is interesting for the narcissists that I've been around, they can never be wrong. And so they basically stack themselves. And what's wild is that they end up being usually very successful. And then they stack themselves with around individuals that, go along with the emperor's new clothes in a lot of ways. Oh, these clothes look amazing, even though the dude's buck naked. Like, they are afraid to like tell him the truth. So they just sit around, and this is the, King Louis the 13th or whatever it is, Louis 16th. This is Elizabethan court. Like, this is the classic where like these guys are courtiers and they're just telling the king what he wants to hear, and you're the best and you're the smartest and you're the greatest. You're going to solve all these things. And all they are is just, the sycophants that are around it. Instead of, and then what they do is if somebody comes in and tells them the truth or might have a point that's right, but they can't handle it, then what they do is they just cast these people out. And, they attack them. This is the wrong person. And then they just surround themselves with people. And I've seen this over and over again with a narcissistic personality people. Yeah,
no, I couldn't agree more. Interesting side note. I think it was Louis the 15th, whoever the king was when Agincourt happened. He had become insane, and he was convinced he was made of glass and would go everywhere wrapped in quilts. He would have periods of insanity. Yeah. And nobody could argue with him because he was the king. So they would have to act like he wasn't fucking crazy. and the whole country knew it was crazy.
Do you ever wonder why these guys are all crazy?
I think there's a lot of reasons. Lead has always been brought up.
Syphilis.
Syphilis.
Like there was always weird venereal
Those
diseases.
are the two biggest ones.
Yeah.
Lead and
So
syphilis.
because they used to drink out of lead cups.
Yeah. And then the Romans used lead pipes, I believe. So
For
they
their
would
water.
just become progressively more crazy. And then syphilis is interesting because we're not familiar with it in this country as much because it gets treated now, but it will like go into remission for years. And then with some people, it crops up in different ways. And insanity is like one of them where it literally eat your brain away. And they could trace people's behavior rapidly changing. You can look it up. There's a list. I think Marcus Aurelius might have died of syphilis.
I'm pretty sure that it was it Nietzsche as well?
Yeah, so Nietzsche became completely insane in his latter years. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, from that, and then there's a few others. I mean, I don't think Karl Marx, even though he was such a piece of shit, I hate Marxist, and I hate Karl Marx. And the hilarious part is having to read Karl Marx, you're like, this guy's a fucking piece of shit. And if you know any history about him, so it's always amazing whenever people are like, I identify as Marxist. I'm like, you're black. This dude was a terrible racist. Yeah. How the hell can you and that was kind of made me laugh in the political landscape where you have these and then it was Marxism was economic, right? Yeah. And he was not an economist in any way. No. Then what they did is they translated it into cultural Marxism, and then you have these people that are black politicians standing up as cultural Marxism. I'm like, did you guys not read Karl Marx in college? Like, we read it as an example of fucking lunacy.
Yeah.
Like, this dude is batshit crazy. This doesn't make any sense. And people are globbing onto this.
There's some kind of genius in there too, though, in the ability to manipulate people and get them to follow you with batshit crazy ideas. Like, I don't know how he convinced troves of people. Like, Lenin was a smart dude.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how, just something. It's just... They just know they come in at the right time where there's a lot of unhappiness and dissatisfaction with society. And that, and rightfully so. There's no labor laws and everything like that. Like, people are impoverished in general. And the people are looking for an answer.
Sure. And
it's just the confidence. Just like Hitler gave them an answer, gave them somebody to blame. Yeah. And Marx gave people something to blame.
It's the rich.
Yeah, it's this group of people. Yeah. It's Jews, or it's the rich, or it's this.
But isn't that what everybody does? I mean, not to relate CrossFit back to this, but it was like, it's us against them. There's, the healthy and the fit and the people who aren't us. They're
the
not
in-group
like
versus
us.
the out-group.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yes.
I always think that if you want to start, like if you're building a revolution, you have to have somebody to rage against. You have to have somebody to point. Like, it's not our fault, it's their fault. And these are the people. And, that's what Greg did a great job of. And then, he did it with his, Big Sugar. So it was, the sugar conglomerates and soda and this. And he had this, we actually went down to where their head office was down in San Diego. He had this wall that had all of these different pictures, almost like an FBI crime where they're looking for serial killers, where there's all these different things and they've taken strings and they've tied them all. And it was all this Big Sugar conspiracy of Gatorade and this and all these things, and had all these things. I walked in and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. I should have taken a picture. I should have found a way. I think they might've taken our phones. But
of course they did.
Yeah, dude, this was his conglomerate. He was going to go take down Big Sugar. This was the problem. I mean, he was incredible of saying this is our team. We're going over the hill to get those guys, and he was able to get millions of people to join him.
If you want to get people together and passionate, don't try to bring them together. Just find a bigger enemy. That's all you have to do, is find a bigger enemy, and then.
Do you relate this back to America? And our basically our proxy wars that we fought for 200 plus years?
Well, I mean, of course, it can be related to everything. But so whenever a president or somebody needs to become more popular, all they have to do is start a war and blame it on somebody else, or find an enemy. You know what I mean? And all presidents do this, whether it's the enemy's the rich, or the enemy's Hollywood, or the enemy's the liberals, or the Russians, or the Russians. And for a while, Trump, he did the Muslims or whatever. It's just find an enemy, and then people will come together. It doesn't matter what it is.
Well, he's got Doge now, so now it's this. Now, this is the problem I have with social media and a lot of these things. I do not longer. So a couple years ago, I spoke at a conference on national security up at the War College in Pennsylvania. And we went to a really interesting talk where this guy talked about disinformation campaigns. Disinformation campaigns, are successful, not when people are sold lies. It's when intelligent people cannot discern between what is right and wrong anymore. Mm-hmm. Whereas people like me, and I assume people like you and a lot of the listeners, listen to stuff and they're like, I don't know what to believe because I'm not a crazy person. But I also am not dumb enough to assume that these people are just benevolently giving me the truth. So I follow, like what's happening with like Trump and Elon and Doge and all this, where they're talking about all this government mismanagement and spending. Like we have known about this for years. I mean, in the movie Independence Day, remember when the president shows up and he's like, who paid for all this? And the guy, Jeff Goldblum's dad, who's not Gordon Levitt, but it's a different guy. And he goes, he's like, did you really think a toilet seat costs $3,000? So like we've made jokes about this, like government spending and this.
And it's known historical fact that our government has funneled money to secret non-approved programs for decades.
Look at, Venezuela oil and George Bush. I mean, whenever people are like,
Iran-Contra and everything else.
I mean, the Iran-Contra deal. Whenever people are like, oh, if you could sit next to anybody on an airplane, who would it be, or have a dinner party? George Bush Sr. Right? Graduates Yale, Skull and Keys, goes in, gets involved in the oil business in Texas, even though he's not from Texas, gets put in charge of Venezuela oil. And they're down there like creating all this. I mean, he, Barack Obama's stepfather, who was, Lolo Soetoro, ran the Indonesian death camps and was like basically like a, paid thug for George Bush Sr., ends up becoming the head of like, Standard Oil in the Philippines. So like people are like, I can't believe Obama and the Bushes are such friends. And I'm like, they grew up together.
They think it's Democrat, Republican. It's so not.
Obama's mom, if you read the history, was a honeypot for the CIA, and then she goes to Hawaii, gets meat. I mean, dude, like these people, and I'm saying these people, but like the people that are put up as these like leaders for us, like this stuff is
they're garbage human beings.
But it's so far-reaching. So the thing with Doge, do I believe it? Yeah, totally, I believe it. And the reason being is if you look at like the policy, like. How is Nancy Pelosi worth, $250 to $400 million, and Feinstein was worth more than that? I mean, they put themselves into situations where they, I believe Dianne Feinstein's husband was a contractor, and he got a deal to redo every post office in America was his contract. I think that's what my dad told me. So my dad was involved in California politics. And so my dad knew all these people. And whenever I asked him, like, Dad, how do these politicians get so wealthy? And he's like, let me tell you how they get this way. They basically set things up so that their family members and people around them. So like it makes total sense.
So as a fan of history, though, that has always been that way and it'll never change.
Like Teddy Roosevelt, like the Bull Moose Party.
It's like those people at that level will always enrich themselves and enrich their cronies. They always have and they always will. I don't care if it's a communist system or what it is. They're always going to get rich and enrich themselves. But it's when it crosses over into policy decisions that hurt infrastructure development, hurt our judicial system, and then lead to decisions that hurt public health. Like as far as like promoting things in our diet and that are safe or unsafe for monetary reasons. I have no issue with these people enriching themselves and being pieces of shit, as long as they're not spreading hateful messages, right? But when it crosses over to now you're trying to sell me and gullible people on putting things in our body that are unhealthy for us, or it crosses over into there's no longer a functioning justice system, which that's happened, or infrastructure starts to break down and I can no longer drive on the street safe. There's no criminal justice and things like that. We're not quite there yet, but that's bled over into that system to where we're feeling it. And people are finally getting, like, make yourself as rich as you fucking want, but don't fuck with my freedom, my ability to travel freely and safely, or spreading lies that affect my health.
Well, I mean, we've given billions of dollars to the Ukraine, right? Which if you understand the strategic nature of the Ukraine, I mean, like this war has been coming for 20 plus years. Putin said, don't put missile silos, don't build, any of this stuff on our border. And they did it. I mean, Obama said he wouldn't and he did. So like, they also said, we have one deep water port for Russia. Don't cut us off from the deep water port. They cut them off from the deep water port. We knew this fight was coming. The issue isn't the fact that we're over there trying to like have this proxy war and, funnel money to the most corrupt country on the planet. But the issue that FEMA and nobody is helping the people in North Carolina. Like I just listened to a guy, they were basically going and buying trailers. They're buying RVs and going and dropping people off because people are living in tents. And like we're funneling money to this like proxy war over there. And we have people like that are taxpayers in this country that are surviving on the benevolence of different groups that are there, and the government should be in there doing this.
So I have a different take on Ukraine, a Machiavellian take on it.
Oh, I like it.
So a lot of the money that we're sending them is in the form of arms that we're giving them that we count as money. And we need a military industrial complex,
Of course.
unfortunately, because companies are not going to do the research and fund unless there's a big bang at the end of that, and volume too. They're not going to put 30 billion into research unless they can sell you 20,000 missiles.
Sure.
So we've had these missiles that haven't really been tested against a first world foe in 3 decades. Some of them, they're getting old. They need to be replaced and updated with better, newer missiles. And also we need the ability to study tactics in modern warfare against a near peer adversity. So from a Machiavellian standpoint, we need to get rid of our old arms industry. And why throw them away when we can sell them to the Ukrainians?
We also tried to give away all that stuff to the Taliban. The problem, what they don't realize when people were complaining about that, I'm like, that shit's junk. Yeah. Because heat and sand destroy circuits.
So they're not telling you. My brother has an inside view of this. A lot of those javelins and stuff aren't working. Yeah. Like 1 in 10, they're so old. And the only other option was to throw them away because you can't sell them on a secondary market.
And
legally.
The amount of money it would cost to bring them back is fucking.
So we need
ridiculous.
to clear our old inventory, and we need to be able to study modern warfare without getting a bunch of Americans killed. And that's what Ukraine is for us. We're funding it so we can study modern warfare. And it's revolutionized our training because we realized how powerful drones were. We're trying to figure out anti-drone warfare and how to maneuver in this new. Warfare always fluctuates between the offensive and the defensive. One always has the advantage. So in World War I, the defensive had the advantage. They couldn't figure out how to get past barbed wire and machine guns. And then it was like tanks and mobile warfare. And then now it's flipped back to these drones. These $100 drones are negating these $4 million tanks.
Yeah.
And so now the advantage is shipped back to the defensive. So it gives us a chance to study how to maneuver and gain ground in this new environment. We'll figure out a way. I'm pretty Machiavellian about it.
The end justifies the means for those of you guys that haven't read The Prince.
Yes, I unfortunately am for the war in Ukraine for very selfish reasons. We need to study modern conflict. And like you said, it was going to come one way or another anyway. Yeah. And what we were doing was we're actually prolonging their suffering by giving them arms. They would be better served if they were serious about it to let Russia take over that country and commit themselves to guerrilla warfare and undermine through political means, spreading propaganda and things like that, rather than a conventional fight.
Yeah.
But everything you said is right.
Yeah.
But I just view it from a different standpoint.
I'm not saying like the idea that there's somehow going to be some global peace, like it doesn't exist. I mean, if you think about wars of occupation are about transfers of wealth. It's how you bilk the American taxpayers, right? Yeah. Like you go over there and, we get involved in these wars and basically that's, we fund it and we just write the check and that's how this thing works. And like the military industrial complex, I think in the history of the United States, there's been 7 years of the entire history of the United States that we haven't been involved in either some war. There's been like not some proxy war in this.
We're an empire. Yeah, that's what empires do.
Yeah, and we do this. We destabilize countries. I mean, I think the CIA, they came back and there's hundreds of regimes that have been destabilized by the United States over the course of like the history of the CIA.
We funded, the Savak in Iran and the right-wing paramilitary groups in Central America. We've done a bunch of bad shit. Yeah. The thing is, like, if we didn't exist, there would be a vacuum and somebody would fill it and they'd become the world empire. And it'd probably be China. And trust me, China wouldn't be better than we are.
Yeah. Well, they're doing it on the other side of this thing.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you saw was it Jinping talked about, we're ready to fight in any way possible, after these trade wars are ready to go. The estimate is somewhere between like 50 and 75,000 Chinese national troops through the United States is what they estimate coming through the southern borders. So, they've basically figured out that if they put enough people here, that if something cracks out, then they have people on the ground, the age old, because our navies are pretty good. They're not going to storm the beaches.
Now they have very little experience in conventional warfare in the last 60 to 100 years. They haven't done any amphibious invasions. If they try to invade Taiwan, it would be a disaster for them. They would probably succeed eventually, but they would lose 500,000 people because they can afford it.
Yeah.
And they're not dumb enough to take us on conventionally. They would destroy our infrastructure, cyber attacks.
Yeah. It'd be, this guerrilla warfare for for this 21st century.
And they don't need to win by occupying our country. They just need to take over their sphere of influence into that region is all they need to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wealth there that we control that they want, for our trade. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty Machiavellian with foreign policy, like NATO. Everybody's for pulling out of NATO, and I'm against that too because we control those countries with our money. Yes. And the threat of Trump isn't stupid. He's not going to pull out NATO.
No,
he's going to threaten it, and the threat of pulling money out of those countries is enough to persuade them and get them to toe the line. And here's the thing too, as long as NATO exists, it standardizes all the weapons. Mm-hmm. So the big part of NATO was weapon standardization. So if I'm fighting with a Belgian troop or a French troop, we use this, the same round.
7.6.
Yeah, and it's just like the same artillery bore, and there's standardization there, right? And guess who controls the worldwide military industrial complex? We do. And we control NATO standardization, and it makes us a lot of money, our military industrial complex, a lot of money by funding NATO. And so we run the world on research and everything else. So NATO is just a strategic move. Yeah, we spend more than the other countries do, for sure. And that's not cool, but they depend on us, and we want to keep countries dependent on us. That's what we do with our foreign aid. Yeah. We're not trying to make these countries better. We're trying to control them. And also, as long as we have foreign aid,
I gave this exact point online, and people were like, the reason that we give all these countries money is so that we guarantee that they use our currency. That's how we basically create this global currency.
We control the world with our currency.
Yeah, with our currency, we're this. I mean, as long as we're giving them money to use, and we live in this fiat currency, which wasn't has always been a problem, but wasn't a real problem until 2020 when they just printed about 80% of every dollar printed was been in the last 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden we see massive inflation and they talk about it, but I'm like, well, we just printed more fucking dollars. I took econ at Berkeley, and they were like, if you print a lot of money, then money loses value, which is like, happened in Argentina and all these other countries where all of a sudden the money, was like $1 million worth of dollar.
Well, the reason we have fiat currency in this country is because other countries invested us, and they depend on our success because they're dependent on that investment paying off. Yeah. And so if it's based on gold or something else.
Well, that's why they took us off the gold standard.
Yeah. So the full faith and trust in the government, it's not just our citizens, but it's citizens in other world. China has full faith and trust in our government because they own so much of our debt that if we failed or went into depression, their cash resources would dry up. So it's a strategic move that we make every other country in the world dependent on our success. It's actually pretty ingenious.
Yeah.
But yeah, the inflation thing is an unfortunate byproduct of that.
You do have a decent amount of writing in this, but I did like this one from May of 2017. Trump doesn't know much about history, or does he? History is more than facts, names, and dates. It's about discovering why the world is the way it is today because of the events that came before, as well as asking ourselves how the world would have changed had things been differently. In an interview with the Washington Examiner earlier this week, President Trump mused, Andrew Jackson, been a little later, you wouldn't have heard about the Civil War. It's interesting that Trump and Jackson could have kept the Civil War from happening, partly because did he ever avert a crisis of succession during the time as president? Interesting take.
Yeah, I mean, Jackson did face a crisis of succession, and it was actually over economics and not slavery.
Yeah.
I don't know if Trump studies history or if he just isn't intuitive.
But he tells him. I feel like he has people around him that tell him this stuff, and I think he's got that Dunning-Kruger effect where, like, if you sit with an intelligent person, I believe he's smart enough to almost parrot what other people say. So if he's around somebody smart, oh yeah, this, and then he takes this. I'm the best that there ever was at this.
Yeah. So when Trump first ran and was elected, you can see in my writings, I was very anti-Trump.
Yes.
Because I took him at face value. The things he said, I took at face value, and then I was like, because he threatens to withdraw foreign aid. And I'm very, and one of those writings, I go back to the Byzantine Empire and the Lakhmids and the Ghassanids and how they withdrew foreign aid from the Ghassanids. And when the Muslims invaded, they lost a crucial ally that was a buffer zone for them.
Yes.
Over trivial differences in faith. but he doesn't actually follow through on it. What he does is he creates a shitstorm and panic and worry. Like, he's not going to buy Canada or take over Canada. He's not going to, I do think Greenland.
My mom's from Canada.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of family, and there's a lot of people.
Canada's a shit show, man. I wouldn't want Canada. Like,
no, but I think it's hilarious that he was calling him little Justin Trudeau, the governor of Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, he is such a world-class troll.
Yes.
Like, and I like, I've always wondered, like, is it really him, or is it somebody else? And I think it's him. I think the dude is a world-class shit talker and an incredible troll.
Yeah. And so, like, I took him as face value, and then people that supported him did. And I knew that if he actually followed through on those things he threatened, a lot of it would have very negative repercussions.
Sure.
But then I'm starting to realize, like, he never really meant to do these things. He just fucking throws this shit out there, gets people really passionate or worried about a threat of doing it, which gives him leverage because he comes off as very unpredictable. And he might be a lot more strategic in his thinking than what it seems, because he says things that are just patently false and untrue, outlandish things. But then other better politicians say things that are mostly true, but when taken out of context are basically fucking false. And, you know, if you say something that's mostly true but has some false in it, it's a fucking lie.
Sure.
And he just, you know, I don't know how I want to say this, but he might be a little smarter than I gave him credit for. You know?
Yeah.
And the whole Greenland thing, we should fucking take Greenland. I mean, it's strategically vital to us.
Yeah. No, I think it's hysterical that he was talking about, like, basically adopting Canada as their 51st state.
I mean, but what it does is never meant. It was meant to just plant a seed against Canada, like
who thinks of this shit?
I love it.
Like,
you like rename the Gulf, dude. I was like, whatever, man.
Dude. But it's like his ability to, like, and I almost wonder to some extent if the water, like think about a pool of water, right? If there's mud, right? Like if it settles, you can see the bottom. If you stir that shit up all the time, it looks real murky. You don't know what the fuck's going on.
Exactly. That's what he's doing.
And so I think what he's a master of doing is this kind of like creating this chaos, this murkiness. I mean, this whole thing. I mean, the fact that like the Doge people have like the Doge report, and every day these guys are going through and weeding this stuff through. I mean, it's I don't know if it's accurate or if it's true, but the fact that they've figured out that these like non-government agencies that like they're these they're nonprofits, these non-government agencies can apply for this funding and they fund these people, and like it's kind of off the books. And if it was a government or a for-profit or actually legitimate thing, like this would be illegal. But because they're nonprofits in this, I mean, they found this interesting loophole for them to be able to, like, just like the USC, I mean, all of this stuff is crazy. And like, so we've always known it's happened.
Yeah.
I just don't think we ever had anybody in position, because probably every president has gone in and looked at this and been like, and you know what they've said? Keep your fucking mouth shut. When you get out, you'll be fine. Like, did you see that they paid Obama $3.9 million a year for the rights to use his name for Obamacare? And they paid for his library and this. I mean, they probably said, hey, just don't say anything. When you get out, you'll be fine. And like, that's what everybody's done. Trump comes in, he's already got his own money. And he's already pissed off at these people that have tried to kill him twice. Yeah. And he's in a situation where he's like, one, my legacy is this. So now, and he also figured out from his first 4 years, he couldn't trust anybody in the government to do it. So then you bring in the richest man on the planet who gives no fucks. I mean, the guy's got Asperger's. He's already they love this guy and now they hate this guy. You know, you got people in California burning their Teslas to the ground because, you know, how dare this guy? And then what's crazy is you would think that every taxpayer would not be okay with just rampant stealing of the government dollars. But because it's Trump doing this, and these people are so visceral against him,
it's crazy.
I'm like, dude, if there's a level of this corruption in this country, and the American taxpayer is being bilked, and that things like infrastructure and roads and taking care of citizens and, you know, like figuring out something at the border, like the deal at the border is a mess. The fact that these cartels figured out how to like bring kids across and this and like kind of manipulate this whole thing just goes to show that like this is a huge problem we need to deal with. And like you probably have to like shut it all down and then put a policy in place. I mean, maybe even privatize it. Like bring in an outside entity, because if the government does it, it's going to get fucked. So once you bring in a private entity to try to figure this thing out, and you know, the way it was going has been interesting. And here's the deal: I'm not a Trump fan.
I don't like him.
I find his suits ridiculous. I find the hair.
I don't like him on a personal basis. I don't like people that are bullies or brag, and it irks me. But just like you said, you have to get past the person to the policy.
Well, so Jesse James is my neighbor, West Coast Choppers.
Yeah, is really that's awesome.
And so he was on The Apprentice with Trump,
yeah.
and he has told me on more than a few occasions that Trump is one of his favorite people in the world. He goes, he remembers his birthdays, his kids' birthdays. He goes, if you were around him for 5 minutes, you would think he's probably one of the best people you've ever met.
There's a reason he instills so much loyalty to those closest to him.
Yep.
You know what I mean? He has to be different in person. And I've heard people say that he's very personable and comes across as very genuine in person. He says, you know, he rubbed me the wrong way with his John McCain comment that
What did he say about John McCain?
that John McCain wasn't a war hero. He likes people that didn't get captured. When Trump did dodge the draft, but so did a lot of other presidents. Yeah. And I like John McCain. He's a very good person, and that rubbed me the wrong way. Some of his sexist.
What do they call him? Eye Patch McCain?
Yeah.
Or no, that's Dan Crenshaw.
That's Crenshaw.
Yeah.
Well, they hate him now too. I mean,
I mean, they, Dan Crenshaw didn't do himself any favors where he got caught on that hot mic saying he was going to beat up Tucker Carlson or fucking kill him or something.
It's just, man, it's just some shit you say and you don't know you're being recorded because you're just fucking mad, you know.
Dude, you got to assume everything you're going to say.
Exactly. That's why I'm not a politician. Because I was like, I'll kill that motherfucker. You know, like, oh shit, that was recorded. Like, but you know, part of it, like, I'm not a Trump fan, but I'm not as anti-Trump now, partly because of what we've already gone over, that maybe he doesn't mean literally some of the things he says. And the other part is he's changed what he's focused on.
Yeah.
Before, it wasn't just we have to secure our border. It came across as very anti-Mexican, and it came across as anti-Muslim. Yeah. And he was for a ban for any Muslims coming into this country. And I'm just, based on our Constitution, we cannot, ban somebody from coming to this country based on their religion.
Sure.
So that rubbed me the wrong way. Yeah. But now they're focused on the big pharma aspect, transparency in our government spending, things like that. They're focusing on things that I've cared about. A lot of us care about for a long time.
We've been raging against this. So the fact that people are like raging against it, like blows my mind. I'm like, wait a minute. If they give us transparency on how our tax dollars are being spent, I mean, the fact that they're able to funnel this money to all these different government. I mean, I just saw Stacey Abrams, like something like $7 billion for some like green deal that they were funneling money to go basically buy green appliances.
California is the most insane place in the world.
No. I think she's in Atlanta.
Oh my God, right? That's right.
Yeah, Stacey Abrams. Yeah. So, and she came out and said 100% the Biden administration funneled this money to me to buy voters.
Jesus. Yeah. I mean,
right. Like we've always known that this has happened.
Yeah.
We just never had anybody in position to ever shine the light on it because nobody ever had any benefit to. Which president's going to come in? Obama wasn't going to do it. Nobody's going to do it for 100 years. I mean, the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1917, I think the IRS was like in like the 18 after the Civil War, 63, 64. I mean, we've had these government agencies and we just never knew how the money flowed out. We never knew because nobody ever put a deal on it.
Man,
Chelsea Clinton's Chelsea Clinton, Hillary Clinton's daughter, $85 million. Making money, providing lunches for third world kids, and in $85 million, like provided like 14 lunches. I mean,
the Clintons are the epitome of fucking nepotism and corruption.
Dude, they are like the darkest rivers flow through them. I mean, you got Bill Clinton going on the Lolita Express, 95 times. I didn't do anything. And I'm like, dude, literally, it's called the Lolita Express because he had a bed where he would abuse young children and you flew on that fucking thing? You never asked what the bed was for?
It's fucking So this is my thing too. Like, I don't turn a blind eye to Trump's indiscretions personally, but
like you grab him by the pussy?
Yeah, shit like that. Just being a womanizer. But fucking Clinton's a pedophile. Yeah. Like, let's put it in But here's the thing though, when they say things on there that inspire America, the things that Trump says, like when he survived the assassination attempt,
dude, probably the most gangster thing I'll ever say about Trump.
As soon as I'm like, oh, he just won the election,
dude. The fact that he turns his head and that guy shoots him through the ear, and then he's got blood and he's up there with his fist, fucking go America!
Just won the election.
I was like, is this a fucking movie? Mm-hmm. Like, and in my head, I'm thinking to myself, is this staged? Like, there's no fucking way this guy misses an election by like millimeters, right? Like, he doesn't turn his head, he catches that in the air.
He did two different tactics to win each election. The first tactic I wasn't a fan of because what he did, he had a minority of people that he talked to and got them to dislike people that they didn't know much about. knowing that if they would get together and vote and turn out, he could win the election because it's about voter turnout, right? Yep. Now he's talking to the majority of people that all have felt this way for a long time. And it doesn't matter your race or creed or religion. We're tired of being taken advantage of. We're tired of being lied to. We're tired of unhealthy things being stuffed down our throats so a very small amount of people can enrich themselves. He's speaking to more things now that will bring us together as Americans against the small but privileged elite. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever the fuck you want to call yourselves. He did some good things in his first term. The things that people got riled up against, illegal immigrants and things like that. And it's just, those are complex issues and that need to be solved, but it's not as simple as bad people are coming here. Mm-hmm. It's way more complicated than that. And it's just, I like the messaging a lot more now, to be honest, about Trump. It's less, you should hate and be afraid of these people, to more like, hey, there's a small group of people that are doing bad stuff and we're going to expose it and we're going to fix it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was, he's, I don't know if he's learned from it or the fact that maybe he was just, trying to be so polarizing in the first one. I mean, he's going to get Hillary Clinton and, it just,
he has a good feel for what's going on.
Yeah.
And there was like just a feel like it's white or rural or conservative Americans were just being shit on so much that he felt that in the first election.
So as a non-crazy person, were you at all like, so one of the hard things I had about Joe Biden, and I've never liked Joe Biden. My dad made an interesting point to me once. He said, probably nobody's done more to hurt the black community than Joe Biden in his, 1982 crime bill.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got to go way back and really look at what he did.
And he goes, not only was he caught plagiarizing and stealing, he's lied and been caught. He had to bow out of an election because he lied about his law school and he plagiarized. And he's always been a career politician piece of shit.
Well, it's interesting because, look at Clinton. I don't know if anybody did more to hurt the black community than Clinton, with his 3 strikes and you're out or whatever that was. It criminalized, like over-criminalization.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it started with Richard Nixon and the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so that was,
which was a war on black people, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as my dad was a criminal defense attorney in LA for over 55 years. Right. He always jokes. He's like, I never saw a black dude get on a plane and go to Colombia and buy the drugs to come back, yes. But it was always there. So somebody had to bring it in. And we ended up learning it was the CIA.
Yeah.
Right. But the one thing which was interesting about Biden is he was a baked potato. Right. Like he was deep in the throes of dementia. You could if you know anything about Alzheimer's and dementia and those deals, like the walk, everything about it. I mean, they had him, juiced up on Adderall, Modafinil and all these different drugs, to the point where, they even knew that when he defecated himself, if it lit up, he had sensors there and pulled him off. Like that's when they were like, he's got to go. Code Brown. Yeah. So, I mean, you have a guy who's a little bit like a legitimate baked potato.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it and you're like, he's not running the government.
No.
He's taking
so who
naps.
Is? What unelected official is?
So we have a bunch of unelected, non-elected bureaucrats who are running this country, and it was running without issue. He's making no decisions. You have all these unelected people behind the scenes signing this, doing this, making policy decisions, going here and doing what they need to do. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this dude is in the throes of dementia, and this thing ran, I would say not well, but like he's, they're making decisions, they're making policy. The United States didn't crumble in those 4 years. No. And that blew me the fuck away, where I'm like, and then, they basically put him in that debate against Trump, and they realized they're like, America saw really how bad he was. Yeah. And it was fucking sad. And I've always talked about elderly abuse, that his wife and those people put that old man up there. Mm-hmm. And that was extremely fucking evil to put that guy up there. So they
Agreed.
They go to that debate, and then they realize we can't do this. So then what they do is they slip Kamala in there. They never had a primary. She was not the incumbent, right? She never ran a primary. They never ran a Democratic primary. They just jacked her through right in there, and she never won the convention. So America gets basically stuck with this
also
fucking
an extremely sketchy background as far when she was in California.
So if you want to know the history on her, this happened about the time I was at Berkeley. The way she got her job was she was blowing Willie Brown.
Everybody knows that.
And got caught by his wife, and in the divorce proceedings gets outed for, basically sex for pay and sex for fucking, this. And she goes up. So, I mean, she basically Willie Brown. So super sketchy. Right, right, has zero curb appeal, doesn't
and then they say it's because she's a woman. It's not because she's a woman.
No,
she was just a shitty candidate.
Yeah,
that shouldn't have even been up there because nobody fucking elected her.
Well, so the Democrats run two broken candidates. Mm-hmm. Who's more broken and dislikable than Hillary Clinton? Mm-hmm. And then they run the second most unlikable broken person in Kamala Harris. So Trump's 2-0 against women, and it's
I think
not
Kamala
because
was more disliked because we felt sorry for Biden at that point. And nobody felt sorry for her.
Well, fucking awful people.
Yeah.
But the issue was at least Hillary won a primary.
Yeah.
Like she won the convention. She was the candidate. Mm-hmm. So like we get stuffed with like this fucking fake candidate that nobody really wanted that they just pushed through. And then you got Trump going against this person. I'm like, this lady never won. She's not a legitimate candidate. This is a fucking travesty of the American, like a two-party system.
My whole thing is, I'm not Democrat or Republican.
No,
but,
I mean, like how can you?
And I could rail on each party, but the thing that irks me about the Democrats is their hypocrisy, how they always try to say that they're for the little person and they're for the minorities. And they have used both of those groups more than anybody in the last 60 years.
Yeah.
They have used minorities and they've used people and only worsened their situation intentionally.
Look at Detroit.
I mean,
like that's the greatest example. If you want to see what happens when you have generational Democratic control, just look at Detroit.
I think a state's a better example, and it's California. Democrats have had control of that state for decades.
Yeah.
And black people and minorities just live in absolute poverty in that state. It's just their policies. It's not just that they don't work. They are just...
they're self-serving.
Yeah, they're self-serving. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, it's self-serving. I mean, who's worse than Gavin Newsom?
Dude. Well, here's the thing.
The rules for thee, not me.
He's going to be president one day. I'm telling you, man, because he's fucking smooth. And if people don't follow his policies and understand how insane they are, if you just listen to him talk for a couple minutes, if he doesn't get specific into policies, he sounds very logical. And he's Trump, but on the other side, and he's smooth. Mm-hmm. I was like, that dude's going to be fucking president, and then we're going to be in a world of fucking hurt. Mm-hmm. Like, unless people actually start paying attention to policies more and not just, like the cult of personality.
Yeah. Well, they had kind of this feeling, obviously Trump's going to be done in 4 years. And so now they were kind of like JD Vance. I don't know if you've seen what the internet has been doing with the memes of JD Vance.
No.
They've taken JD Vance's face and they have put it on every hilarious thing from Cabbage Patch Dolls to blueberries. I saw this whole, oh my God, dude. They are basically, because as soon as they came out and they were like, hey, when Trump's done, JD Vance is the heir apparent. So what they did is they can't attack Trump. I mean, he's the Teflon Don. Mm-hmm. I mean, they call John Gotti the Teflon Don. I call Donald Trump the Teflon Don because you cannot fucking make anything stick to him. He's bulletproof.
Yeah.
And so what they were doing is they were looking at Vance, and all of a sudden now and I can see Jacob on his phone. Jacob, look it up. It is unbelievable.
I like JD Vance a lot, man.
I mean, dude, he's military service. I mean, grew up, mom on, I think it was in Ohio on, pain prescription
West
drugs.
Virginia or Ohio. He wrote Hillbilly Elegy, right? A great book.
Yeah.
Very insightful on the human plight and dynamic.
He's sharp and he's a good speaker. This is my favorite type of podcast. I mean, this is one of the best. We got to talk a little bit about strength training. Yeah. We got to talk about performance. We got to talk a little bit about the CrossFit drama that we've been I feel like we've bonded as kindred spirits into this deal that I sucked you in. I don't think that you knew what was going to happen when you kicked that hornet's nest.
I love fitness and everything fitness, but there's a lot of other stuff I would like to talk about, and I just want to be able to branch out. And
I was so. I don't like. I'm not going to offend you in any way, but I was so happy when I went through and I read that humanist thing, and I started going through that, like it was like a warm, sense of calm came over me that I was like, man, I'm so happy to know that you have an opinion. It's intellectual in this, and that like our conversation wasn't going to just be sets and reps in here. And, you know, like you had we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but you had an incredible rant on like performance enhancing drugs from your truck, which I thought was great. So there was so many different things. But when I read that, I was like, oh man, like this is the type of stuff that I like to talk about because I am an American and I am a taxpayer and I am, you know, intellectual, you know, like pursuits and, you know, went to Berkeley and these things. And these are the things that are more like present in my life as I'm looking at these things, more so than arguing about like what's rep range and what volume reach hypertrophy in this. And I'm like, the research has already been done. We have, you know, decades of programming proving what this stuff is. We already solved these equations. Yeah. And to hear people like arguing about this stuff, I'm like, there's so many more like important conversations that we need to be having. The interesting part
to that is to get the result based on the individual and their environment and how to be creative into tailoring a program that blends the science with a creative approach and knowing when to compromise. Like that's when I get like really into it.
Yeah, that's the artwork.
Yeah,
like it's the mastery.
Exactly. The science stuff I kind of get bored with because it's just like, you know, there's so much back and forth about the little minutia in a lab.
My boy Paul Carter is decided to die on this fucking hill of like science and like it's just his deal. And he is like, this is the road he's going to go on, and he fights these battles on this. And I look at him and I'm like, man, the fact that you have to strap up your helmet and put on your vest every single day to go fight.
Be careful of that too. Science always changes, man. It's just one study around the bend that, you know, I can't remember. There was something that people built their whole career on. I wish I could remember exactly.
Time under tension.
That was one of them for sure. And then when that was kind of disproven, or I'd say disproven loosely, but they couldn't support it with evidence. Yeah. It's like, now what do you fucking do, man?
But we figured out compensatory acceleration. If you move the barbell as fast as possible, like that's a fucking, I mean, Fred Hatfield proved that and basically disproved time under tension years ago. But because Poliquin went so hard into time under tension that everybody thought everything that Charles Poliquin was so touched was genius, but we knew that it was bullshit.
Let me clarify. Well, time under tension, here's the thing. If you can't move heavy weight fast, and you still want big muscles, you can move a lighter weight for longer as long as it takes you close to failure, and you can get your muscles bigger and somewhat stronger. So in that regard, there's something to time under tension. And as far as the metabolic stress and the hormonal response, none of that stuff has panned out.
No.
But they do know that there's something there. If you can put a muscle under a little bit of tension for a long time until it's close to failure, the muscle will grow. So if you want to say time under tension is a real thing, then, and I use that term a lot too, but that's what I mean by that. You know what I mean? Well, it's a different mechanism.
His deal was like artificially like tempo, like 6-2, you know, where they were like moving every weight or trying to. And I'm like, dude, you basically, it just...
I mean that's been fucking proven over and over again. It doesn't, like, there's a upper limit to how slow you can move something before, but moving it faster doesn't make it less effective.
Yeah.
And with what we do, it makes it more effective if you can do it.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I'm not against slow eccentrics, because a slow eccentric is better than no eccentric.
Well, but also we do know that if you, you know, I remember there was a cool deal where a guy kept talking about remodeling tissue using foam rolling. And I'm like, it's like 1,000 pounds per square inch to remodel tissue. The only thing that effectively remodels tissue is heavy eccentrics. And Cal Dietz' triphasic proved that.
Yep.
So like all the foam rolling and all the tempering and all that other shit doesn't remodel tissue.
Tendons isometrically under a lot of load will eventually,
Yeah.
But you know what they did? They came up with those very heavy rollers.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not what you're talking about.
All it does is relaxes your nervous system.
Yeah.
Right. That's it. It just, the stress, it's like a heavy blanket.
So I'm not against foam rolling pre-workout if you're real tight, because it gives you that that tricks your nervous system into loosening up.
That's it.
Yeah.
But they were like, oh, I'm over here remodeling tissue. I'm like, dude, it's 1,000 pounds per square inch. There's no way for you to do it. The only way you do it is heavy eccentrics remodel tissue, and there's training blocks that involved tissue remodelization.
If there's so I know we're probably running out of time here, but if there's two things, it's the wash out the lactic acid is still prevalent. I hear it all the time, which is crazy.
That people are using the word lactic acid,
and they say wash it out and wash it out.
So what is it like clearing lactic acid is? Are they talking about washing?
Like 2 days later, coaches and trainers will say we're doing it to get rid of the lactic acid. They still say that. That's still a thing.
Do they still use the word lactic acid?
Lactic acid is which I forgive them for that as long as they know it's lactate a little bit. But the notion that you train to wash out something that dissipates within an hour or so that isn't even a waste product. that professionals still say that fucking irks me to the core.
Yeah.
Another thing that I really wish more training would occur without an amortization phase. I love amortization phases, but like for rate of force development and, you know, real world strength, more things from a dead stop. I wish that was a little bit more prevalent in training. And you don't need even a large minority of your training to be that way, but sometimes it's just completely opposite. Anything other than a deadlift, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's why I like Tom Havlin. He does a lot of his training from a dead stop for those reasons. And
yeah, you'll do like like a dead stop squat and like picking things up, and then I mean like reversing the standard, standing up, eccentrically loading, and then coming back down, kind of reversing that. Which I do. We used to do a ton of bench that way. Start on your chest and bring it up and lock it. I mean, that was one of my favorite things because it actually translated better towards football, right? Because if you're here, I was always this way more so than like here.
And then your eccentric always becomes limited by your ability to withstand the amortization phase. Where if you can just like a yielding eccentric, you can't stop it.
Yeah.
So I use a lot of that training in my young athletes. I'll have them go down to a pin and just try to stop the weight.
Yeah.
And it looks what it does. It looks like a slow eccentric and it looks ineffective, but it's completely different.
Well, you're also training people in those eccentrics. So we found that eccentrics and isometrics, especially in the end ranges, because I always thought of a lot about like we would do a lot of isometrics, but they were always in like the starting position, like standing up with the squat. Then we figured out that like, it was actually Cal Dietz's triphasic, like, let's use the isometrics. I love
that dude stuff, man.
Yeah. Cal's a good friend. He's been on this podcast many a times, but like that like idea of loading into it and then being able to hold those end ranges and show proficiency, that shit's fucking dynamite.
I'm a big fan of stopping at different joint angles, practicing decelerating at multiple joint angles. And then I wish flywheel training would become much more pervasive. And flywheels are affordable. They would be much more affordable if, economy of scale.
Sure.
Because it's great because it's self-limiting. So it's hard for people to hurt themselves because they can't generate the eccentric overload.
Sure.
Those are a few things that I really wish would become much more prevalent in the overall gym culture. So, my mission is kind of take the basics of what we talk about here and dumb it down. And I don't mean that in a negative way to the general population of fitness so they can use some of it, because just a little bit of it sprinkled here and there would have massive benefits to the everyday athlete. And flywheels are one of those things that, man, if they were in every gym, it'd be such a great thing.
Yeah. I have one, and then I had it set up and we actually moved it, and I got to re-put the post back in it because I had it mounted on a rack, but it was fucking, people were chipping on it. But yeah, I do like the flywheels. Chris at Kabuki, or when it was Kabuki before, Duffin got kind of fucking hostile takeover and booted out of his own company, man. He had a pretty dope one. There was actually a really neat eccentric one. I actually tried to I couldn't wrap my head around the price, but they had a flywheel that was a leg extension machine.
Oh yeah.
And dude, we ended up kind of setting up Chris's deal, and I used it, and then I used a incline bench to try to mimic it. Dude, the amount of stress that it was putting on the hip flexors, I felt like my pants were tighter. I was like, oh my God, my hip flexors are getting thick. I think flywheel stuff's good. I did have one question for you, and this kind of, I feel like, dude, we covered so much, but not enough. The one question I had is, and this is pretty interesting, where do you see fitness going in 5 and 10 and 20 years? I mean, you've kind of been in this kind of cascade of performance training into football and seeing in the military. And then, I read that you were, worked at a World's Gym, and then, obviously in the position you're in now. Where do you see this thing going? I mean, do you see, because I feel like the early 2000s and even into the 2010s plus, we saw this rise of P90X, CrossFit, Orange Theory, and all this kind of group training, high intensity type work. And I feel like it's kind of tailoring off a little bit to say CrossFit's not as dynamic as it once was, where they had 13,000 affiliates. So where's fitness and training and performance going in 5 and 10? And where do you see it going?
I'm fairly optimistic, but I caveat that with, I understand human nature, and we will, like you said, make everything an in-group, out-group, and fight these stupid battles. But it seems like people are starting to crave more performance-based training that makes sense with their life, and not just ego-based training or aesthetics-based training. And they're seeking out ways to elicit responses that fit their lifestyle, based on things like dose and like minimal effective dosing, and the adaptations, intracellular adaptations and things like that, they're starting to embrace that a little bit more. These myths that we talked about are starting to die slowly. And I'm really optimistic that people will start to embrace performance-based training. And that will be paired with the technology that's coming out too, where you can have an app on your phone, like we talk about a flywheel or something, and you can easily put a sensor on a bar and start tracking bar speed. So the technology is there. It's people don't embrace it yet, to literally put a sensor on a barbell, have it attached to an app on your phone, and be able to measure the velocity of your bar speed. And as soon as we can convey how crucial that is to people, everyday people, not just elite athletes, and they embrace it, and then all of a sudden it goes from how much do you bench to how fast could you move your body weight.
Sure.
And that will revolutionize performance, I think. But we have to be able to, but I do say that like hesitant, because like people, they turn everything that could be great into something negative and competitive. And if somebody's not using the sensor, then they don't know what the fuck they're doing, or, you know what I mean? But I think that the technology can pair with the quest of people they want to look good, but they understand that you can look good and be able to perform a certain way. And it's just like everything's cyclical. So like you said, the movie 300.
Yeah.
But if you go back to around the turn of the century, before bench pressing got big and everything like that, they had developed ways to get the Greek god body type look developed. And they knew a lot about fitness then that we've kind of forgotten. Sure. And I think that appeal is starting to come back, like the body that looks like it can perform because it can perform. I think and also, I would hope a more inclusive acceptance of fitness. That we rag on CrossFit, and if somebody tells me I'm doing CrossFit, I'm not mad at them. I'm happy that they're out there getting healthy. It's just a more inclusive, and that's kind of why I'm torn about ragging on CrossFit so much, because I think what people forget, and especially when I talk about CrossFit, there's this interesting kind of like my exposure to, working with Greg and kind of those kind of pieces, and kind of seeing some of the mistakes that I viewed. I always viewed CrossFit very similar to like, almost like Facebook in a lot of ways, that Facebook is not like if Facebook doesn't buy Instagram and, Telegraph and all the other things, like Zuckerberg wouldn't be what he is, right? Instagram is far outpaced. He was really good about allowing people to live within his ecosystem. And if they prove themselves better, then you bring it in-house and you own it. I kind of viewed this thing in the very similar way, that if we brought in a piece of technology, which is how I viewed Power Athlete and my stuff in terms of fostering and developing athleticism, I viewed that technology piece, that like CrossFit would be like, man, this is dope technology. Let's bring this in. And I kind of imagined in this kind of benevolent way, because I was young and idealistic and I didn't understand the way this whole thing worked, that they would just kind of accumulate all these different technologies and then own it all. And they would own the entire spectrum from endurance to power in this, and it would all be done under the same roof, and they could like use it. And that's not what happened. And if anything, when we started kind of pushing it out, I was like, no. Like, I understand the mission. Like, this thing, like, these are pieces that you've asked me to do. It doesn't detract from it.
And it doesn't take away from what you're doing. And so when I talk about my experience at CrossFit, it was me working in the market and being kind of thwarted in so many ways by the guy that created it, even though I was tasked with this. So when people are like, oh, that guy, the deal, like John Wellborn hates CrossFit. I'm like, dude, I don't hate lifting weights. I don't hate functional movements. I don't hate like people lifting at high heart rates. And I love the fact that people have garage gyms and people show up and they have community and they bang weights. Like, it's the coolest thing ever.
It is really cool.
Yeah. And I love that they're tuned in, and it's health and all of these things. When I talk about it, I'm talking about my personal experience of being on the cusp of this thing and trying to offer my piece to be able to try to own the entire like paradigm, and then feeling like, fuck, we were so close. And, and it was, a lot of these other things. So even on your podcast, what we talked about was like my own personal experience, retelling historical story that led to the creation of CrossFit football. And these are my own things. Like when he asked me, do you think that this develops athleticism, or if this is an athletic form of training? And I said, no, because here are the problems. This is how I view athleticism. This is what you're doing. So you know what we did? We went and taught it, and all of the gyms started incorporating it and adding these pieces.
Yeah.
So what they forgot is that the influence, and they were like, well, we do that stuff in the warm-up. We do that stuff in training. Amazing.
Yeah, that's good. Great.
You got the memo. And they were like arguing against us. And I was like, but that didn't exist before that conversation. So this conversation helped drive a narrative that made you guys better. And I'm fucking stoked for you. And these people that were coming at us, I was like, dude, no. You have to remember, this was
I'm for you. I'm not
2008, 2009. This is years ago.
Yeah.
And this thing has evolved past it. So thank God. Welcome to the party.
It's kind of like chiropractors, though. Some have evolved and some haven't.
Yeah.
There's some box out there that just haven't evolved. And I would see it, like you said, experience. My athletes would leave and go train CrossFit over the summer or whatever. They would always either get hurt or come back slower and weaker. Well, they were in really good shape, but they couldn't lift as much. They couldn't jump as high. They couldn't achieve the same max velocity. So I saw firsthand how CrossFit not only doesn't develop athletes, what they were doing was making my athletes worse. Less athletic by quantitative measurements.
But you're defining athletes as these individuals that can perform in a given task in a sport.
Yes.
So the problem is that when this is where this thing got really interesting with semantics, right? Because you're doing something physical, you're an athlete. And I remember being like, just because you get sweaty doesn't make you athletic, right? And so like these were these kind of weird, kind of like semantic nuances that people were drawing it in.
Then everybody should do Zumba, man, because you know Zumba will get you sweaty.
Yeah, it'll get you sweaty. You're moving.
It's actually multiplanar. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I could argue why Zumba is better than CrossFit. Yeah. I really could. I could make a good argument for that. You're reacting to novel stimulus more often. It's multiplanar. There's more ballistic activity. It's social as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't be genuine in that argument, but I could make an argument.
Yeah, you could argue these things.
Man, it's just I just wish things would be more inclusive, so we don't have these rival camps that hate on other things, and that we embrace technology because it's become affordable and portable. We can GPS track max velocity now. Yeah. We have high-speed cameras on our phones, so we can measure all our joint angles and hip split and just. If we can just make the average person understand what metrics are really important and really matter. I mean, you could put a GPS thing on you and just jump up as high as you can and track your vertical jump height. You don't need special equipment for that. We're at the cuffs now. If people would embrace it, the average person can move, look, and feel a lot better with a minimal investment. The wearables will track, you'll know your average heart rate overnight now. I mean, they're very affordable and, I track my heart rate throughout my workouts, and it's just, we're right there.
Yeah, it's close.
And there's this conception that people have that if to do this, it takes 10, 20 hours a week, and it doesn't. If you go by the dosage recommendations, like you were talking about intensity, you don't need very much at high intensity. Yeah. What is low intensity, you can multitask that and incorporate in other aspects of your life. Well,
and the other issue too is everything is related to exposure and like kind of like what you've done. Like the amount of effort that it takes for me to maintain at my age compared to what it took to build this is very different. Yeah, like for me, it's like, maybe like 3 max effort sets a week at a given movement, like is the course of like my training. Like I don't have to do X amount. Like it's very interesting dose related.
The hard thing is what people need the most is what they're not doing. And so people that have gotten really big and strong, they turn out they love strength training, so they want to do more of it. And it's like, that's great if you want to do more of it, but you don't need to do more of it.
No, that's why I do all my zone 2 work and I go to jits because those are the 2 things that are the hardest things. The lifting weights is fun. Yeah. I like banging weights, and and believe me, I'd love to just go in and bang weights, but there's other things you need to do.
I forgot to bring this up. So we were talking about swimming and how great it was. So when I was in Ranger Regiment, I was really struggling. The thing I used my physiology background. And I was like, my running sucks. I was 230 pounds at the time. I was like, running more is not an option for me. So I was like, I'm going to run twice a week. I'm going to do an LSD run, and I'm going to do like a high, intensity interval training type run, like a 60-120 or something like that. So that's my 2 runs a week. And then what I did was I incorporated a lot of swimming because, like you said, my volume wasn't limited. It was Georgia in the summertime, so my heat wasn't an issue. And then the coolest thing it did for me, because I had to time my breathing out, and I didn't realize this at the time, it built my CO2 tolerance because I had to keep my heart rate relaxed and time my breathing. So I became more tolerant to CO2. Mm-hmm. And swimming was what really made my running. I ran less and became a better runner than I'd ever been. I also incorporated a lot of cycling too, because cycling you can do it for hours.
Yeah, and there's no eccentric load. So
There's no eccentric.
I think cycling is incredible.
Yeah. To this day, I lean heavily on cycling because it's hard for me to distance run right now with my weight. So I cycle a ton, and I do a lot of rowing.
Nice.
But I just want to throw that in there, like advocate for swimming for heavier guys, swimming and biking. Yeah.
Cool.
So.
That's all I got, dude, until we meet again. But yeah, hopefully at some point we'll be able to rehash this stuff on another podcast. But dude, thank you so much for coming.
I loved it, man.
I feel like we got to fill a bunch of the holes that we didn't get to in our last one. So thanks for tuning in.
I loved it. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by klfi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.